Chapter 648. Blood-curdling screams could be heard all around. Blood splattered everywhere, filling the night sky with the smell of blood. Li Changlong looked at Tan Tan. Tan Tan's entire body was bathed in blood. His appearance was on the verge of collapse. Moreover, the fierce look in Tan Tan's eyes had almost condensed into a solid substance. Therefore, a palpitating feeling welled up from the bottom of Li Changlong's heart. Xie Dan Feng staggered 2 steps as she was pushed by Tan Tan. However, she didn't run away as she had been told. Instead, she suddenly stood still. Then, she turned her head and foolishly looked at Tan Tan's back. Her eyes were filled with happiness and happiness. Yes, in such a hopeless situation, Xie Dan's phoenix eyes didn't show any sorrow, despair, or fear of death. There was only sweetness and happiness. "Why haven't you left yet?" Tan Tan roared violently. "I'm not leaving. I'm scared." Xie Dan Feng sadly said, "I'm scared. What if we don't die together, and we get separated on the road to the Yellow Springs? I'm all alone with no one to protect me. Even if I become a ghost, I'm still afraid. I've never tasted this kind of protection before, so I'm not afraid of anything. But now, I know that I want to be protected by you." Xie Dan Feng bit her lips. Her eyes were overflowing with tenderness. Her deathly pale face was faintly discernible under the flickering saber and sword lights. Therefore, "Tan Tan, let us die together if we have to die. That would be so blissful." Xie Dan Feng sighed as if she had nothing else to ask for. "Stupid woman! Stupid woman!" Tan Tan gnashed his teeth and cursed, "How can you be so stupid?" Xie Dan Feng's body swayed a bit. She then smiled and said, "It's better if I'm a bit stupid. I'm afraid that you won't want me if I become smart." Tan Tan faced upwards and roared. A mouthful of bright blood suddenly spurted out of his mouth. He then shouted, "Woman! You'll die after I die. You know, I don't want a bunch of ghosts to point at my back and say, 'This bastard can't even protect his own wife.' Do you understand? The reason I practice martial arts is to protect. Protect you. Protect my master. Protect my senior brother. Protect him." Xie Dan Feng nodded obediently. "Don't worry. I'll keep my eyes open before you die. But I'll take my last breath with you when you close your eyes. Regardless of life or death, don't even think about abandoning me." Tan Tan felt a surge of hot blood in his chest. He suddenly started to pant for breath. It seemed as if an indescribable emotion had suddenly brewed and accumulated in his heart, and it made his entire body feel as if it was about to explode. Li Changlong stood in front of them. However, it seemed as if neither of them had seen this life-or-death enmity. However, Li Changlong suddenly felt as if he had been struck by lightning when Tan Tan had said those words. A wave of agony surged through his heart. It was as if a soft spot in the depths of his heart had been ruthlessly struck. Li Changlong found it difficult to breathe at this moment. His lofty and insufferably arrogant body suddenly stooped and curled up into a ball. "The reason I practice martial arts is to protect. Protect you, protect master. Protect. I practice martial arts in order to protect." Li Changlong muttered. "Then, who am I protecting? Where are the people who need my protection now?" Li Changlong's eyes suddenly became perplexed. His body swayed a bit. It seemed as if a huge mountain had suddenly pressed down on his body, and he couldn't breathe under the pressure. "Don't even think about abandoning me, dead or alive." Xie Dan Feng's voice came from a very close distance, but it seemed to have come from an incomparably distant place in Li Changlong's ears. It was incomparably indistinct, yet it was clearly transmitted. It seemed as if another person was whispering to Li Changlong, "Don't even think about abandoning me, dead or alive. Don't even think about abandoning me, dead or alive. The reason I practice martial arts is to protect." Li Changlong suddenly raised his head. His expression was mournful as he roared towards the boundless blue dome of heaven with all his might. His face was distorted. His eyes were filled with grief and regret. He suddenly held his head with both of his hands. Then he faced upwards and crazily roared. 2 lines of tears suddenly flowed out of his eyes. The agony in his heart had completely submerged him at this moment. The distant memories of the past suddenly welled up in his mind in a split second. This is true love. I used to have it. I used to have it. I used to have it. I was just a little boy at that time. My neighbor was a little girl like her. She wasn't very good looking, but she was very gentle. We were childhood sweethearts. We grew up together. We both knew that we were going to accompany each other for the rest of our lives. I would have lived an ordinary and happy life if nothing had happened. She and her father had agreed to marry me when I had proposed marriage at the age of 17. We had been drinking at her house that day. We had gotten drunk, but we had been very happy. But we had seen a wedding when we had gone out the next morning. A young man was pulling a carriage with a snow-white horse. His bride was in the carriage. The bride's face was full of happiness and satisfaction. I felt inferior at that moment. I felt angry. I suddenly remembered that the woman I loved had never sat in a carriage in her entire life, let alone her own carriage. I thought at that moment that I wanted to make money. I wanted to struggle. I wanted to earn a carriage for the woman I loved. I wanted her to happily sit in that carriage and enter our home. This was my dream. I started to work hard for this dream. I kept working hard. Then I realized that I didn't know how to do business. Moreover, I didn't have strength. Yes, as long as I had strength, I would not only be able to earn a carriage, but I would also be able to protect my woman. So, I wanted strength. So, I started to look for every opportunity. I left with my master without hesitation when he appeared. Pan Pan, wait for me. I will become a great hero and come back to marry you. That was what I said before I left. Pan Pan had said at that time, I don't want you to become a great hero. I only want you to be by my side, okay? But I didn't agree. I only asked, wait for me to come back. Then I left. Yes, I fought for my woman in the beginning. Always. But I don't know when I started to lose myself in this Jianghu. I always felt that I wasn't strong enough. I couldn't protect the people around me. So I kept on practicing. I was passionate about killing. I was passionate about revenge. I kept on attacking, but I forgot my original intention. It was only a carriage. It was only a carriage. When I finally achieved something and came to my senses, I went back to marry my bride. At that time, I had already made up my mind. Pan Pan, no matter how old or ugly you become, I will marry you. I will marry you. But when I went back, I only saw a lonely grave. There were only 2 words on the grave, Pan Pan. I don't know. Is that your name? Or is that your hope for me? Pan Pan. Is it Pan Pan? Or is it hope? I heard from the villagers that you didn't marry anyone your whole life. You were always waiting for me. I waited until your bones were thin. I waited until your heart was broken. When you breathed your last, your hand was still clutching the only hairpin that I gave you that year. Until your death, you didn't complain a single word. You didn't say a single word. You died, but your lonely grave was still waiting. It was still praying. At that time, I already had a carriage. Moreover, it was at my fingertips. But who would sit in my carriage? I already had the ability to protect you. But where are you? I practice martial arts in order to protect. But who do I want to protect? Li Changlong let out a long and loud roar. It seemed as if he wanted to shout out all the pain and regret in his heart. But the more he shouted, the more pain he felt in his heart. In fact, he was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. Tears started to roll down his cheeks. Especially when he was faced with this pair of lovers. One would protect his lover at all costs. The other would stay with his lover even in a desperate situation. They would stay together regardless of life or death. Li Changlong suddenly understood. He suddenly understood what Pan Pan had said that year. He suddenly understood what Pan Pan had hoped for when she had been lying on the bed at her last gasp. How much unwillingness and regret had she taken away when she had breathed her last, and how much attachment had she felt? Wasn't Pan Pan like Xie Danfeng at that time? She didn't ask for her man to be more powerful than everyone else. She only wanted him to be together, or die together, Even if he couldn't protect her, that was enough. Being together is the greatest happiness. Tan Tan and Xie Danfeng are on the verge of death. But they are much happier than me in comparison to my own mistakes. They are 10,000 times happier. Li Changlong curled up in pain. He suddenly had a strong desire. Go back at this moment. Go back to Panpan's side. Even though that place is only a lone grave overgrown with weeds, but I want to go back. He groaned. Then he suddenly roared, Go! Go quickly! I will kill you if you don't go. Tan Tan hadn't expected that the powerful enemy in front of him would suddenly lose his mind at such a critical moment. However, he didn't have time to think about it. He pulled Xie Danfeng's hand, and the two of them staggered as they rushed over. They rushed past Li Changlong. Tan Tan's severed arm patted Li Changlong's lapel as they rushed past him. But Li Changlong didn't seem to feel it. He stared blankly and his eyes were full of pain. Go quickly! Xie Zhiqiu's body shook. He then clashed with the two Emperor-level experts. Those two Emperor-level experts were sent flying like embroidered balls under the full-strength attack of this Monarch-level expert. Xie Zhiqiu spouted blood. He then rushed over with Xie Danqiong on his back. He grabbed Tan Tan with his left hand and grabbed Xie Danfeng with his right hand. His eyes were glaring angrily. He then rushed into the woods while coughing up blood. 50 people of the Xie clan had died behind him. The remaining less than 100 people rushed out of the gap on Li Changlong's side and rushed into the woods. Rui Butong's entire body was bathed in blood. He was carrying Ao Xie Yun on his back. He was vomiting blood as he rushed in. Li Changlong allowed the crowd to rush past him. He remained indifferent. In fact, some people had become bloodthirsty. They had casually slashed him when they had passed by him. But he hadn't moved. He had let that saber slash his shoulder and get embedded in it. Chapter 649. Brotherly! Brotherly! Kai Shaoqing was scared out of his wits as he rushed over. He thought that Li Changlong had used some kind of evil technique. Li Changlong raised his head in a daze. Kai Shaoqing was startled. He took 3 steps back. Li Changlong's face had become densely wrinkled at this moment. He looked senile and senile. His lifeless eyes suddenly emitted a bright light as he muttered, I practice martial arts in order to protect. Pan Pan, I want to go back. I want to go back. Li Changlong suddenly stood up and roared crazily towards the sky. Kai Shaoqing was at a loss. The leader of the black-clothed and masked men of the Zhuge clan calmly put down his hand. Several hundred blue needles had quietly disappeared from his palm. This Li Changlong has suddenly lost his mind. But this is also good. I don't have to deal with him personally. He calmly pondered in his heart, this bastard of the Ao clan almost wiped out this group of people in one fell swoop. He's simply hateful. Remember to keep your distance. Another black-clothed and masked man glared at him. He then scolded Ao Lang Yun, Are you blind or deaf? We asked you to chase after them. We didn't ask you to kill them all. Why would you wait until now if you wanted to kill them all? Bastard! Ao Lang Yun was so angry that his vision turned dark. He almost couldn't restrain the anger in his heart. So, he retorted sarcastically. But he was stopped by Ao Meng Yun in the end. We only want to kill Ao Xie Yun. Let them do as they please. It's fine as long as Ao Xie Yun dies in the end. Ao Lang Yun heavily snorted. The complexions of the 4 black-clothed and masked men of the Zhuge clan changed at this moment. Their eyes emitted a cautious look as they looked towards the distant sky. They saw that an awe-inspiring pressure had suddenly appeared in the distant sky. It seemed as if a sharp sword had cut through the air. The sky had been densely covered with black clouds. But a bright starlight had suddenly appeared in the distant sky. It was a fury that had soared to the sky. And it had completely cut through the black clouds. The 4 men were shocked at the same time. They looked at each other. Then one of them asked in a low voice, Who is this? His question was obviously nonsense. After all, they were so far away. So, no one knew who this person was. However, one thing was for sure. This person was extremely terrifying. The leader of the masked men in black pondered. Suddenly, his eyes widened in shock. Did we attract the catastrophe sword master when we chased after the awakened ones? As soon as these words were spoken, the few people who were rushing forward suddenly came to a halt. What followed was a deathly silence. Suddenly, they sensed something and turned around at the same time. Far away behind him, another sharp sword soared into the sky. In the blink of an eye, the dark clouds in that area were swept away. The two sword energies, one from the south and one from the north, faced each other from a distance. Suddenly, the wind that blew through the sky became so sharp that it seemed as if it was going to tear his face apart. One from the south and one from the north. Two streams of sword energy that could cut through the sky appeared in the air. It was as if two peerless swordsmen had agreed to a battle. Currently, they were both unsheathing their sharp swords and preparing for battle. It was just preparation. If they already had such power, then when the two of them really fought, how earth-shattering would it be? After a short while, the two sword chis retracted. However, the pressure in the air was getting thicker and thicker. It's definitely not the catastrophe sword master. Another masked man in black said, "As everyone knows, there's only one catastrophe sword master. But now, there are obviously two." The leader of the masked men in black nodded slightly and said, "It seems that I've sensed wrongly. However, isn't it strange that such two peerless swordsmen could appear in these three heavens? The so-called laws of the heavens can only restrict ordinary people. Big Brother, with our status, we naturally know that some transcendental existences are not restricted by the so-called laws of the heavens." "That's true. Let's go and chase after them." In the distance, Chu Yang stared at the place where the sword chis appeared. The dark clouds in the starry sky were slowly gathering back. It was as if the stage that had just been opened was slowly closing again. Chu Yang's eyes suddenly lit up. That was the direction of the Lake of Despair. The fourth fragment of the catastrophe sword. Chu Yang's heart flashed. He still rushed in the direction where the Xie clan had escaped. He loosened his grip and an invisible falcon flew out of his hand. With Mo Tianji's information network, it was indeed a lot more convenient. The people of the Xie clan rushed into the dusky forest. Tan Tan took out 5 inner cores of spirit beasts while coughing blood. Then he swallowed them. Then he felt that they weren't enough. So, he took out 5 more and swallowed them. Go. Go straight ahead. Don't turn around. Tan Tan's eyes flashed with a bright light as he resolutely ordered. Don't turn around? Xie Zhiqiu asked reluctantly. Don't turn around. Tan Tan heavily said. The group of people rustled and disappeared into the forest. The people of the Ao clan chased after them. Ao Lang Yun took the lead and rushed to the front. He didn't want to stay with those masked men in black at this time. He also understood one thing. The opposite party has a purpose. So, it's impossible to use today's matter to form a relationship with the opposite party. The Ao clan was ranked first in the 3 heavens. However, it wasn't enough in the eyes of a colossus like the Zhuge clan. Ao Lang Yun and the others felt that something was wrong as soon as they rushed in. There was something strange about this forest. Rustling sounds could be heard from all directions. They were fragmented and concentrated. Then, something seemed to fall down from above everyone. A king-level expert of the Ao clan extended his hand and grabbed his head. He couldn't help but scream when he saw what it was. There was a small dark green snake squirming in the palm of his hand. There were also 2 caterpillars, 4 or 5 ants, and a bedbug. "What's going on?" he screamed. Then he threw these things away as if he had received an electric shock. No one answered him because everyone who had come in had encountered the same thing. The rustling sounds continued from all directions. They were getting louder and louder. It seemed as if it was a dense drizzle in an autumn night. The next moment, it seemed as if the ground had been turned over. Countless earthworms, rats, vipers, ants covered the ground in a layer. Whether it was ants or rats, they were using their only means of attack to crazily attack these people who had suddenly intruded into the forest. Everyone was beating them in a flurry. A buzzing sound echoed from afar. It seemed as if a large group of hornets had lined up in a row. They blotted out the sky and covered the earth as they descended. They couldn't wait to launch an attack even before they arrived. What's going on? What's going on? Ao Lang Yun was beating them in a flurry. Everyone had profound primary power in their bodies. So, these things naturally couldn't cause any harm to them. In fact, these guys wouldn't be able to bite even a little bit of skin even if they exhausted themselves to death. However, these things were covering the sky and covering the earth. Everyone's collars were piled up in an instant. That kind of disgusting feeling was driving them crazy. Moreover, their feet felt soft every time they took a step. It seemed as if they were stepping on something. And 3 or 4 vipers would recklessly wrap around their feet every time they took a step. This is fucking strange. Kai Shaoqing was beating them. He was cursing, how can such a bizarre thing happen? Don't worry about these little things. Let's rush forward with all our strength. Another Emperor-level expert propped up the protective domain. His face was sullen. Who would have thought that they would need to activate the Emperor-level domain to deal with these ants? However, it would be disgusting if they fell on the neck and fell on the skin if they didn't activate it, even if they died from the shock. This forest wasn't small. But these little things seemed to be increasing in number as everyone moved forward. Soon, a thick layer of them had accumulated under everyone's feet. The people of the Zhuge clan came in after them. The black-robed leader was pleasantly surprised when he saw this terrifying phenomenon. It seemed that even his spirit had been uplifted. He shouted, "Sure enough, they're here. We've chased them for so long, but nothing unusual has happened. We almost let them escape. Chase after them, and capture them alive. Don't kill any of them. The awakened one must be among them." He was finally sure now. That awakened one of the 3 stars divine clan must be among them. But why didn't that slaughtering spirit blade have the slightest reaction? The 4 people looked at the knife in their hands. They were speechless. They were at a loss about this matter. Ten only felt that all the injured places on his body were itching. They were squirming. The ruthless mood in his heart seemed to be slowly breaking out of its cage. His pupils had unconsciously turned blood red. It seemed as if a murderous aura that had been dormant for thousands of years and a madness that had been dormant for thousands of years was gradually awakening. Countless small animals rushed out in a hurry. They sacrificed themselves even if they had to be trampled on. They had to stall for a moment. Tan's body was getting hotter and hotter. Eventually, a flash appeared on Tan's forehead. It seemed as if that strange mark had become a little bigger. Then, it flashed 3 times in a row. Tan suddenly faced upwards and roared. His body suddenly emitted a wisp of black gas that was darker than the dark night. It was steaming and dense. It shrouded Tan's body. It was so dark that one couldn't even see his own fingers. Tan's body seemed to have suddenly disappeared in this black fog. The people of the Zhuge clan swarmed in. These people were all experts. The people of the Ao clan couldn't compare with them. They had already caught up with the people of the Xie clan who were advancing in a straight line. The black-robed leader looked at the black fog that had suddenly steamed in the dense forest several hundred feet away. His eyes emitted a complacent look. He insipidly said, "Unfortunately, you're too late." He waved his hand, "Go!" 2 long and loud roars suddenly resounded outside the forest at this moment. One of them was a sharp sword energy, and the other was a sharp saber light. 2 furious murderous auras pierced through the forest. Then, a sword light shone brilliantly, and a saber light bloomed violently. At the same time, they rushed into the forest with unstoppable force. Everywhere they passed, it was like 2 huge balls of light had turned everything in their way into powder. A big tree that required 3 people to wrap their arms around had turned into dust in an instant. The eyes of that black-robed man of the Zhuge clan emitted a shocked light. He stopped and said in amazement, "Pure Sword Emperor and Pure Saber Emperor? How can such people appear in the last 3 days?" The other person was also surprised. He subconsciously muttered, "Sword Emperor and Saber Emperor are natural enemies. How can these 2 people come in side by side?" 2 furious voices resounded like thunderclaps in the midst of the sword energy and saber light. It seemed as if 2 lightning bolts had illuminated the entire sky. Who dares to hurt my brother? Chapter 650. The saber and sword transformed into two bolts of lightning and thunder. They flashed from outside the forest and then rushed in. It didn't matter if it was a human body, a tree, or even a small animal in front of them, they were all crushed into powder without exception. Blood fell like rain, like mist, drifting down in a swirl. Gu Du Xing, Dong Wushang, Sword Emperor and Saber Emperor. These two had made a long and arduous journey. So, their physical strength had been somewhat overdrawn. However, their spirit and murderous aura had been stimulated to the peak during this long and arduous journey. It was a kind of ferocious, imposing aura that could even split the sky in front of them with a saber and cut it into pieces with a sword. This imposing aura was a kind of madness without any reason. And it was hysterical. Even the 4 monarch-level experts of the Zhuge clan couldn't help but flash when they saw the imposing aura of the Sword Emperor and the Saber Emperor at this moment. They couldn't help but dodge. This dodge of the Zhuge clan's people didn't matter. But the backs of the Ao clan's people were illuminated by the saber and sword of the Sword Emperor and Saber Emperor. Gu Du Xing's black dragon sword shone with bright rays of light. It arrived behind a king-level expert of the Ao clan first. Then, blood and flesh splattered everywhere. It spread out like a thick fog. Gu Du Xing's entire body was clad in black clothes. Then he fiercely rushed out of the blood fog. His black dragon sword was still like a long and shining dragon. It unreasonably plowed a bloody passage in the ranks of Ao clan. Gu Du Xing broke through the crowd of the Ao clan with a flash of light and landed in front of Rui Butong. He didn't have time to say anything. He had already turned around when he landed. His back was facing Rui Butong, and he was facing Ao Lang Yun. It was as if a heaven-shaking divine sword had appeared with an awe-inspiring murderous intention. The sword's edge swept away everything in its path. On the other side, Dong Wushang's saber came chopping down even more ferociously. One slash from the top, one slash from the bottom, one slash from the left, and one slash from the right. This slash was inevitably accompanied by a loud shout. It seemed as if the entire forest was trembling along with this loud shout. He didn't rush in like Gu Du Xing. Instead, he used his supreme power to forcibly break open a bloody path one step at a time. Cut open a bloody path. One slash. A king-level expert in front of him blocked it. Clang. Both the man and the sword were cleanly cut in half. He swept his saber to the right, and with a loud shout, another man was cut in half along with his sword at the waist. Dong Wushang's majestic figure charged over just like that. Anyone who stood in his way would be slashed. The saber struck without any injuries. Death was certain. Dong Wushang suddenly slashed his saber again when he saw that he was about to break out of the encirclement. He hacked a 3rd-grade emperor-level expert of the Ao clan along with his sword and sent him flying. The 3rd-grade emperor-level expert spat out blood, and his sword shattered into pieces. Dong Wushang had already shouted, "Rui Badong." Rui Badong shouted excitedly, "Fourth brother! I'm still here." Alright. Dong Wushang slashed his saber again, and chopped the enemy in front of him into a rolling gourd. He then shouted, "Tan Tan." "Tan Tan is still here. He's recuperating," Rui Badong hastily replied. He knew that Dong Wushang couldn't open his mouth at this moment. Dong Wushang would probably go crazy if he didn't answer. "Xie Dan Qiong." Dong Wushang shouted as he slashed his saber. He called out the names of his brothers. Xie Dan Qiong struggled to shout on Xie Zhiqiu's back, "I'm still here." Ao Xie Yun. Dong Wushang fiercely slashed his saber and chopped down the last enemy in front of him. Then he walked over with large strides. "I'm here," Ao Xie Yun replied in a weak voice. "Good. Ha." Dong Wushang faced upwards and laughed heartily. Then he turned around like a whirlwind. His tall and sturdy body looked like an iron tower. He stood in front of Ao Lang Yun and the others like an immovable mountain. Ao Lang Yun and the others suddenly felt that a lofty mountain had suddenly appeared between them and Ao Xie Yun. Dong Wushang raised his black saber horizontally. Then he slightly pointed it forward and shouted, So, it's you. Just by relying on you. Who do you think you are? Ao Lang Yun couldn't help but fiercely take a step back. The three youngsters behind him exposed a solemn look in their eyes. They were in a hostile position. However, they still felt their minds waver in the face of Dong Wuxiang's innate heroic and overbearing aura. A kind of strong appreciation rose in their hearts. You're Dong Wuxiang? The new saber emperor of the Dong clan, Dong Wuxiang? Ao Yun didn't conceal the admiration in his eyes as he asked. Who else deserves the name Dong Wuxiang apart from me? Dong Wuxiang's eyes flickered with fierce lightning. He faced upwards and laughed wildly. His wild and overbearing aura seemed to have the power to swallow the wind and the clouds. Who else in the entire heavenly layer apart from me, Dong Wuxiang? Even a supreme expert can have my spirit. These words were extremely arrogant. However, even the 4 monarch-level experts of the Zhuge clan nodded in agreement. They thought, these words are very reasonable. They are absolutely true. There were countless people whose cultivation was higher than Dong Wuxiang's in the entire heavenly layer. The people who could easily kill Dong Wuxiang were as many as the stars in the sky. However, there wasn't a single person who could have Dong Wuxiang's innate heroic spirit, including the supreme experts. This was the kind of person who would resist independently even in the face of all living things in the world. Moreover, even if he was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot, he would still have the idea of victory. Dong Wuxiang was the only one in the entire world who had such an imposing aura and such an overbearing aura. Ao Lang Yun snorted and insipidly said, So what if you're the only one in the entire heavenly layer? You're still king of Hell Chu's slave. Dong Wuxiang's eyes flickered. He laughed wildly. How can someone like you comment on whether I, Dong Wuxiang, am a slave or not? Tell me your name. Second Master Dong should consider whether I'll use the back of my saber or the edge of my saber when I kill you. Rubadong couldn't help but laugh behind his back. You're going to die either way. So, why would you choose the edge of your saber and the back of your saber? Dong Wuxiang glared at him. Bastard. What if I let his filthy blood stain my saber's edge? He laughed loudly. Dong Wuxiang's saber will kill all the heroes in the world. How can my saber cut trash? That would be a supreme insult to my treasured saber. Ao Lang Yun trembled with anger. He clenched his teeth and said, Dong Wuxiang, Ao Lang Yun, will kill you with my own hands. Ao Lang Yun? Dong Wuxiang looked at him disdainfully. He then laughed out loud. It seems that I can only use the back of my saber to kill you. Ao Lang Yun was mad with anger. Suddenly, a voice was heard. My clan's misfortune has implicated all my brothers. Brother Dong, you're flattering this bastard even if you use the back of your saber. Let me clean up the clan. A man walked out from behind Dong Wuxiang with heavy steps as he spoke. He then stood side by side with Dong Wuxiang. It was Ao Yun. Gu Du Xing had rushed over and turned around. He had taken out the incomplete version of the heavy pill from his jade token. Then, he quickly stuffed it into Ao Yun's mouth. It wasn't that he didn't consider the others. It was because Ao Yun's injuries were the most serious. Moreover, this assassination was a family matter of Ao clan. So, Ao Yun had no choice but to come forward. Ao Yun would be justified as long as he came forward. Moreover, the conflict with Ao clan wouldn't reach the point of no return even if all these people were killed. Therefore, Gu Du Xing had rushed in first to give the medicine. Then, Dong Wuxiang attracted everyone's attention in one fell swoop. He created the conditions for Gu Du Xing, and created time for Ao Yun. Sword Emperor and Saber Emperor. These two people didn't have any communication. However, their cooperation was flawless. Ao Yun had finally recovered a part of his vitality. He hadn't fully recovered yet, but the effects of the heavy pill were still ongoing. Therefore, he stepped forward and looked at the members of Ao clan behind Ao Lang Yun, Ao Yun, and the others with his sharp eyes. Then, he gloomily said, Could it be that you want to rebel? Everyone had followed their lords here to kill Ao Yun and let their lords take the throne. However, the upright young clan lord of Ao clan was standing in front of them safe and sound at this moment. So, everyone felt somewhat guilty in their hearts. So, they lowered their heads one after another. Ao Lang Yun became anxious in his heart. He then shouted, Ao Xie Yun, you're like a stray dog right now. Even your own loyal subordinates have been thoroughly buried. What qualifications do you have to occupy the position of young clan lord? How can our Ao clan have a prodigal son like you? Go, kill him for me. At this moment, the sound of horse hooves echoed from afar like muffled thunder. It was obvious that a large group of people was rushing over here. Almost all the people of Ao clan were here. It was impossible for the people of Ao Lang Yun and the others to arrive at this time. They could only be Ao Xie Yun's reinforcements. Ao Yu Yun, Ao Lang Yun, and the other three lords became very anxious. They shouted at the same time, Go! Kill him. Today's mission will be accomplished if you kill him. Ao Xie Yun's body swayed a bit. He looked at his four younger brothers. They were connected by blood. They had grown up together since childhood. These people were the children of his own uncles. At this moment, he actually wanted to kill him without any mercy. However, the ones who were protecting him were Gu Duxing and the others whom he had only known for a short time. Then, he suddenly laughed and said, Are these the brothers of the clan? You've gone mad to such an extent. Is power really so important? However, no one answered him. The eyes of Ao Lang Yun and the others had turned red. They were only urging their subordinates to kill him quickly. Ao Xie Yun sadly closed his eyes. Then he opened them again. His eyes had already become ruthless. He said in a low voice, Then don't blame me for being ruthless. No one heard his words amidst the shouting. But his eyes flickered with callousness at this moment. And this made the hearts of the people who had rushed forward shiver. Gu Duxing let out a long and loud shout. He flicked his sword, and the black dragon sword issued bursts of dragon-tiger roars. He then shouted, We brothers are here. Who dares to make a move? Dong Wushang burst into loud laughter. That's right. We are here. Whoever comes forward will die. There were wounded soldiers behind the two of them. Only the two of them were facing hundreds of experts. The strength of these hundreds of people was enough to kill Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang countless times. However, the heroic spirit of these two people was awe-inspiring and insufferably arrogant at this moment. It seemed as if they were facing a field of clay chickens and pottery dogs. Hundreds of experts faced these insufferably arrogant Sword Emperor and Saber Emperor. However, they stopped and stagnated for a moment. The sound of a horse's hooves echoed like a rainstorm. A solitary horse rushed into the woods in the dim light of the night. It seemed as if it had put down all its worries. In fact, it even shouted in high spirits, A woo, dog ant. Second brother Gu, what you said really made me excited all of a sudden. Motherfucker, you are too imposing. You are always on the verge of dying. That's all for today. The treatment is getting more and more painful today. According to the doctor, my nerves have begun to be stimulated to the point that they are beginning to recover. Therefore, it will be even more painful. And this kind of situation will continue for a while. I'm crying. Chapter 651. Following the shout, a horse rushed in. A thin figure jumped up from the horse's back, somersaulting dozens of times in the air like a whirlwind, and landed in front of Gu Duxing like a meteor. Then this person turned around abruptly, put on a majestic look and shouted, A woo, dog ant. Second Master Ji is here. Who dares to go up? Who comes up? Whoever comes up will die. This sentence was extremely pretentious, and it was a kind of pretentious smugness. Because GMO was suddenly relieved. His brothers were all here, not dead. And he was here. Everyone was together. Then, if he didn't show off now, when would he? Even if he died with his brothers right now, he wouldn't have any regrets. If he didn't show off now, when would he? When Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang said, Whoever comes up will die, it gave everyone a kind of pressure, a kind of fear of death. But when GMO said, Whoever comes up will die, it gave everyone a kind of relief and relaxation. Such a vicious sentence gave everyone the feeling that this person in front of them was very happy. Very happy, because at this moment, I'm here. Everyone was stunned for a moment. At this moment, a weak but fierce voice said, "Cough cough, that's right, whoever comes up will die." There was actually someone who agreed, and this person turned this originally happy sentence of, "whoever comes up will die," into a kind of cruelty and viciousness that belonged to hell. This sentence was said with gritted teeth. After saying that, he even coughed a few times. Following the voice, a young man appeared in the forest, walking over step by step. He walked to Ji Mo's side, turned around, and stood side by side with him. Suddenly, he smiled and said, "Damn, this feeling of rushing over from 1,000 miles away is fucking awesome. The blood in my body was burning all the way here, but when I saw you guys, it suddenly stopped burning." This person's face was pale, and his eye sockets were deeply sunken. His chest, back, shoulders, and thighs were wrapped in bandages, and there were still traces of blood seeping out, forming shadows. It was Luo Kadi. His position was the closest to here, but in order to hold on until now and not let himself faint halfway, he had slowed down a little. So among the brothers, he was actually the last one to arrive. But no matter what, he still came. At the most critical moment, the old ancestor of the Xie clan, Xie Zhiqiu, closed his eyes. He was circulating his martial power with all his strength. He was striving to restore his strength to the greatest extent in the shortest amount of time. When Gu Duxing and his companion arrived, he let out a sigh. There was a hint of palpitations on his face. Then, he sat down and began to circulate his energy. He knew that although these youths were geniuses, the difference in strength between them and the other party was too great. Therefore, they were here to die. He was here to accompany his brother in death. Therefore, Xie Zhiqiu didn't say anything. The current situation was dangerous, and there was no hope of escaping. He only wanted to recover some of his strength and do his best to drag as many enemies down with him as he could. He knew that the enemy's strongest expert had yet to make a move. The black fog around Tan Tan started to churn and spread out. In the entire forest, almost all the animals, insects, and birds were gathering in this direction. Although they were small and weak, they actually formed a huge wave. The branches on the tree fell from time to time, as if they had been crushed. The branches also slowly drooped down. Pairs of small eyes ruthlessly looked at the people of the Ao clan and the Zhuge clan. Even the rats opened their mouths and exposed their sharp teeth. They were glittering in the dim light of the night. The poisonous snakes were coiled up in circles. They were hanging in the air. Their eyes were faint, and their fangs were faintly visible. Ao Lang Yun turned his head in panic and looked at the black-clothed masked men of the Zhuge clan. It seemed as if they were looking for help. The black-clothed masked leader had his hands crossed behind his back. He was looking at this side with an indifferent expression. He didn't have the slightest intention to help. His eyes would occasionally flash. He would look at Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang with eyes full of appreciation. Today's harvest is too big. Not only have we trapped the awakened experts of the divine race here, but we have also obtained a sword emperor and a saber emperor who are less than 20 years old. These two youngsters will become saint-level geniuses in less than 200 years. In fact, they might even become supreme-level geniuses. The Zhuge clan had always been thirsty for talents. So, how could they let go of these two good seedlings? The hearts of Ao Lang Yun, Ao Yu Yun, and the other brothers gradually became cold. They could see that the opposite party wouldn't come to their aid. They were clearly sitting on top of the mountain and watching the tigers fight. The four geniuses clenched their teeth as they thought of this. Don't tell me that we can't clean up these defeated troops if we don't rely on you? Ao Yu Yun waved his hand and viciously said, "Whoever comes forward will die. Let's see who will die." He waved his hand, and it seemed as if he was waving all the small animals, insects, and birds in the forest. The people of the Ao clan hadn't moved yet. But these little guys had moved first. Shwa shwa shwa. The sky seemed to be filled with hemp ropes in an instant. Ah no, it was filled with poisonous snakes. The poisonous snakes on the trees bowed their bodies at this moment. They opened their big mouths and exposed their poisonous fangs. They attacked the experts of the Ao clan. Rats, birds, ants, wasps launched their attacks at the same time. These attacks blocked everyone's line of sight in an instant. These attacks couldn't cause any harm to these experts. However, they looked extremely terrifying. The people of the Ao clan had no choice but to fight with these small and weak creatures before attacking the enemy. Gu Duxing's eyes flashed. He stretched out his hand and grabbed Luo Kudi's shoulder. Then he threw Luo Kudi behind him and landed beside Rui Butong. Then he indifferently said, "Watch him." Luo Kudi was seriously injured. So, how could Gu Duxing let him stand in the front? Luo Kudi became furious. "Second brother Gu. You bastard." Gu Duxing's complexion was cold and stiff. Then, his body suddenly rushed out and turned into a shining sword light. He was the only one who could move. That was because he was the only one who could move at this time. The enemies were besieged by small creatures. So, the best way to fight at this time was to take advantage of the chaos and launch a sneak attack. These animals were too weak. So, they might be wiped out in the next moment. Therefore, he had to seize the right opportunity. Dong Wushang wasn't suitable for sneak attacks. And Ji Mo's cultivation was slightly weaker. Gu Duxing's body moved, and the sword light flashed like a thunderbolt. His sword pierced into a human body that was densely surrounded by ants and wasps. Then he pulled it out and rushed in. An arrow of blood shot out from the place where he pulled out his sword. And a king-level expert fell down with a face full of fear. Several emperor-level experts of the Ao clan launched their attacks at the same time. Their domains were completely unfolded in an instant. Then they shook with a loud bang. There was a series of light swishing sounds. All the small creatures in the sky and on the ground were shaken to death. And a layer of them was laid on the ground. There was a moment of silence in the forest. A total of 10 emperor-level experts launched their attacks at the same time. It was obvious that these emperor-level experts couldn't bear these small creatures any longer. So, they launched their sharpest big move. They used mountain-suppressing mosquitoes to get rid of them all in one fell swoop. Gu Duxing's body flashed, and the sword light was faintly discernible. Then, his body shot back like lightning. A first-grade emperor-level expert in front of him spurted out blood from his throat like a splendid firework. Then he fell down weakly. Gu Duxing went in and out. So, he only had time to go in and out. However, 10 people had already died under his sword. But the people of the Ao clan had already rushed over. Dong Wushang shouted loudly and unsheathed his dark saber. Then he slashed open the rain of blood in the sky. This was the prelude to the decisive battle. Ji Mo shouted loudly. He unsheathed his sword and rushed out behind Dong Wushang. Rui Butong and Ao Xie Yun attacked at the same time. Xie Zhiqiu jumped up from the ground where he was sitting cross-legged and joined the battle. A full-scale war broke out. However, the people of the Zhuge clan didn't make a move. They were indifferently looking at the war in front of them. They were only paying attention to 3 people, the Black Fog, Gu Duxing, and Dong Wushang. The sound of horse hooves outside was getting more and more urgent. It was obviously getting closer and closer. Gu Duxing's sword sheath emitted a sword light. He was fighting with an 8th-grade emperor-level expert. Both of them were wounded in the first move. Gu Duxing's left shoulder was stabbed by the sword. However, that emperor-level expert's thigh had a piece of flesh cut off. Gu Duxing's martial power wasn't enough to injure him. However, his black dragon sword had become a top-notch divine weapon after it had been modified by Chu Yang. The two of them clashed and then fought. Gu Duxing fought with his life on the line. He was stalling for time. That 8th-grade emperor-level expert couldn't do anything for a while. Dong Wushang faced the 2 8th-grade emperor-level experts, Kai Shaocheng and Li Changlong. His dark saber moved unhindered, and he didn't retreat even an inch. He clenched his teeth and fought with all his might. His injured brothers would be behind him if he retreated. Dong Wushang was in a precarious situation. He was surrounded by dangers. However, Dong Wushang's attacks were bold and bold. He brandished his dark saber in a wild manner. Xie Zhiqiu rushed out from behind him and faced Kai Shaocheng. He fought with his life on the line. The pressure on Dong Wushang was greatly reduced when Kai Shaocheng retreated. He brandished his saber wildly and suppressed Li Changlong. Li Changlong had been somewhat absent-minded during this time. However, he was an 8th grade emperor-level expert after all. His cultivation was 7 grades higher than Dong Wuxiang's. However, he was forced to retreat little by little under Dong Wuxiang's desperate attacks. However, Dong Wuxiang wasn't in a good condition either. His wrist felt sore and numb every time his opponent struck him, and his whole body would shake. However, he didn't seem to have noticed anything. The black-clothed and masked leader of the Zhuge clan who was watching the fight suddenly wrinkled his brows in this noisy place. He looked around suspiciously, but he didn't find anything. I clearly sensed that someone has sneaked in. Why didn't I find anything? Chu Yang had entered this dense forest that was filled with blood like a wisp of smoke. The first thing he did was heave a sigh of relief. My brothers are here. However, Chu Yang only glanced at them. He was about to attack when he discovered something. So, he immediately hid himself. Gu Duxing and the others had fallen into a disadvantageous position at present. However, Chu Yang could see that their lives weren't in danger for the time being. But, what are those 200 black-clothed men doing? Why are these people so powerful? What are these people planning? Chu Yang had seen at a glance that these black-clothed men were the biggest crisis of tonight. My brothers won't have any trump cards if I go out. Therefore, I must cooperate with them. Monarch-level experts. 4 of them. The sword spirit's voice was very heavy in Chu Yang's mind. 3 of them are 2nd-grade monarch-level experts, and 1 is 3rd-grade monarch-level expert. Chu Yang's whole body shook. Chapter 652. Tonight is going to be a fierce battle. Sword Spirit said slowly. Chu Yang smiled bitterly. Fierce battle? What fierce battle will there be? We are already at a disadvantage against the experts of AO clan. If we face those masked men in black as well, we will be wiped out in the blink of an eye. Sword Spirit, if you take control of my body, what are the chances of success? Chu Yang took a deep breath and asked. Sword Spirit sighed. If I take control of your body, I am 100% sure that I can defeat them. But I can't do it now. Chu Yang was happy. The 4th sword fragment has appeared. The 4th sword fragment is in the center. It controls the heavenly secrets. Once it appears, the master of Tribulation Sword will be on the right path. Moreover, the entire heavenly layer will undergo a huge change. This is the biggest opportunity for the master of Tribulation Sword to obtain the sword. The sword spirit said in a deep voice. Moreover, the 4th fragment of the Calamity Sword is the only life and death trial of the Calamity Sword Master. Therefore, I need your divine soul to be completely intact. Even if it's just a little bit damaged, it's absolutely impossible. If I take control of your body now, it will cause great damage to your spirit. At that time, it will be impossible to recover. At that time, you will not be able to pass this test. Your spirit will be destroyed. This is the most likely outcome. Chu Yang pondered for a moment. After a while, he said, how big is the possibility of us escaping alive if those people really attack us? What are the chances of Gu Duxing, Dong Wuxiang, and the others dying? Sword Spirit smiled bitterly and said, if they want to kill, none of them will survive. If they want to capture them, none of them will be able to escape. Chu Yang nodded and mischievously smiled. Then what other choice do I have? If I don't let you attack, do I have to watch my brothers die? But the choice is in my hands. I will not attack when the 4th sword fragment appears. Sword Spirit sighed. I am only responsible for Tribulation Sword and its mission. I cannot be responsible for you or your brothers. Chu Yang said confidently, you will attack. I'm sure. Sword Spirit sighed. Don't force me. He was well aware of how Chu Yang would force him to make a move. You're forcing me, Chu Yang said coldly. Don't forget that Emo Qingwu is still waiting for you. The sword spirit was helpless. He had no choice but to use his most effective weapon against Chu Yang. He firmly believed that Chu Yang would change his mind once he heard the name Emo Qingwu. This was because Chu Yang's greatest obsession in his previous life was Emo Qingwu. In this life, it could be said that he had been reborn for Emo Qingwu. Now that Qingwu has her master, I am very relieved. Her fate has already changed. Chu Yang said lightly, but love isn't the only thing in life. If because of this, Jianghu is sad, you can go sad. I can't do anything about it. Chu Yang said softly, just like in my previous life, I loved her very much, but she was still driven away by me. She still died. Your identity should be revealed during this period of time. Sword Spirit was anxious. Your master's wish is still waiting for you to help him. When I can't take care of everything, I can only take care of what's in front of me. Chu Yang said lightly. Stupid. Sword Spirit scolded angrily. Chu Yang laughed in his heart and said, Sword Spirit, sometimes as a man, being stupid is the only thing that can make one feel at ease in life. Stupid is a curse word, but sometimes in life, stupidity is the most precious thing. Chu Yang said, You're not human. You don't understand. So, please shut up. I only need you to help me. Sword Spirit was so angry that he turned around and returned to the tribulation space. He didn't speak anymore. I'm not human. Damn it, you dare to say that I'm not human. I've been in this world for tens of thousands of years. What kind of things and emotions have I not seen? But I've seen so many tribulation sword masters, and none of them are as stubborn as you. Chu Yang smiled and thought, sometimes in life, you need to be stupid. Then, both of them stopped talking at the same time. This fierce battle was getting more and more intense. The people of the Gu clan were already seriously injured. So, they simply couldn't withstand this one-sided battle. If Gu Du Xing, Dong Wushang, GMO, Miao Butong, Xie Jiqiu, and Ao Xie Yun hadn't blocked most of the attacks, they would have been killed long ago. But everyone had been trapped in a very small area. They were trying their best to resist. In the center was Tan Tan's black fog. GMO groaned. Blood flashed from his shoulder. He was in so much pain that his whole body trembled. Then he was hit on his back again. Gu Du Xing shouted and spat out a mouthful of blood. He forced the enemy in front of him away. Then he rushed over and protected GMO behind him. He said angrily in a low voice, Where's your medicine? Bastard. GMO's vision had already turned black. He was on the verge of collapse. These 2 consecutive heavy injuries had almost taken his life. He suddenly realized when he heard this. He hurriedly reached into his bosom and took out a heavy pill. He said embarrassedly while chewing, I forgot, you only remember your Aobua. Luo Kadi was panting beside him. He was trying his best to pull out his sword while muttering, Motherfucker, it's strange. You've already seen Aobua. Why didn't she crush you to death? Get lost, you motherfucker. GMO was furious. He felt that his vitality had suddenly recovered. His wounds didn't hurt anymore. He rushed out again. His curses were even more deafening. Luo Kadi spat out a mouthful of blood and cursed, You can scold me. But why are you scolding my sister-in-law? She's my elder brother's wife. She's not mine. He hadn't finished speaking when a voice as soft as a mosquito's buzzing echoed in his ears, Open your mouth. Luo Kadi was overjoyed. Big brother? Big brother is here? He hurriedly opened his mouth. He only felt a blur in front of his eyes. Then, a pill rushed into his mouth. Luo Kadi felt that all the injuries on his body had recovered in an instant. He couldn't help but look up to the sky and laugh wildly, Awu, hard awu. How dare you provoke Second Master Luo? He rushed out energetically. Gu Du Xing's words had not only reminded GMO, but also reminded Chu Yang. He needed to hide in the dark for the time being. But it didn't hinder him from saving people. These motherfuckers of Ao clan will be exhausted to death as long as there are enough incomplete heavy pills. Xie Dan Qiong was already somewhat dizzy on Xie Jiqiu's back. He suddenly heard someone say at this time, Xie Dan Qiong, make your ancestor open his mouth. Xie Dan Qiong was startled. Then this voice echoed again. Xie Dan Tao finally recognized it. This is Chu Yang's voice. He hurriedly said to Xie Jiqiu, Ancestor, open your mouth. Xie Jiqiu was an arrow at the end of its flight. He could collapse at any time. So, he angrily said, Can't you just stuff it in my mouth? Xie Dan Qiong anxiously said, It's not mine. Someone will throw it in your mouth if you open it. Chapter 653. Oh, old ancestor, you've trusted me again and again. Dan Qiong would have stamped his feet if he hadn't been seriously injured. Xie Zhiqiu snorted. He had no choice but to believe him. So, he opened his old mouth. He didn't know where a pill had come from, but it was thrown into his mouth the next moment. It really works. Xie Zhiqiu was startled. He thought, I don't know whether it works or not. Who threw it? I look all around, but I don't have time. He felt a surge of heat rising from his dried-up dantian the next moment. His strength had recovered by less than half in the span of a breath. He was pleasantly surprised. He roared and rushed out. Then he ferociously attacked. My strength has fully recovered. Xie Zhiqiu's joy was no small matter. He was an L-grade monarch-level expert. So, dealing with these people of the Ao clan would have been a piece of cake if his strength had been fully recovered. He roared wildly and rushed out full of vigor. Kai Shaoqing sneered and used all his strength to meet his palm. He thought, I would have been afraid of you if you had been at your peak. But you've lost your life now. So, why would I be afraid of you? Who would have thought that he would feel a mountain-toppling and sea-overturning force when his palms met? Kai Shaoqing shouted loudly. His eyes revealed an expression of disbelief. Blood spurted out from his 7 orifices. His body flew far away like an embroidered ball. He crashed into a big tree, and his ribs broke with a kacha sound. He shouted before he lost consciousness, Did I see a ghost? This is impossible. Xie Zhiqiu burst into loud laughter. His white beard fluttered in the wind. I've been chased all the way here. So, I've finally vented my anger. He leapt into the crowd like a tiger. He started a massacre with his left hand and his sword in his right hand. He thought that his home had been destroyed. His ancestors' painstaking efforts of several hundred years had turned into nothing. He had fled for his life. Countless of his descendants had died in front of him. So, Xie Zhiqiu laughed sorrowfully. He angrily attacked. There were tears in his eyes. But they were ignited by his anger before they could drip down. Blood was constantly splashing out from his palms and his sword. This made Xie Zhiqiu feel the joy of endless revenge. It seemed as if he could see a wisp of the heroic soul of the Xie clan peacefully closing its eyes every time the blood splashed out. Rest in peace. Rest in peace. All the way, have a good trip. Xie Zhiqiu roared crazily and sorrowfully as he attacked. He was giving his blessings to the heroic souls of his family that he couldn't save in time. Because I have already avenged you. It was as if he could already see the silent road to the Yellow Springs. After witnessing the death of their enemy, his clansmen would all walk onto the shining road with comforting smiles on their faces. They would never look back again without any regrets. Look, I have avenged you. Revenge. Xie Zhiqiu's attacks were even more hurried and ferocious. The moment he regained his strength, he was completely deranged. A splendid viburnum flower bloomed on his back at this moment. Xie Danqiong had also obtained an incomplete version of the heavy pill. His strength had been restored in a flash. So, he jumped down from the old ancestor's back and attacked with his viburnum flower. As soon as the dazzling and gorgeous viburnum flowers appeared, it was followed by a rain of blood. When the viburnum flowers bloom, 100 flowers wither. When the world's #1 hidden weapon was used, the effect would be absolutely extraordinary. No one had expected that the young lord of the Xie clan would suddenly recover. Many people's lives were taken away by the viburnum flowers. The viburnum flowers dazzled and danced in the air. A stream of mournful and beautiful blood-red light and bright petals penetrated a person's body, and then penetrated another person's body. Blood-curdling screams were heard one after another. Then, Luokadi also rose to kill the enemy as the heavy pill flew out. The injuries on his body also recovered. Dong Wushang roared in the fierce battle. Suddenly, he didn't care about the burden on his body. He fiercely and tyrannically hacked his saber one after another. Li Changlong on the opposite side suddenly felt a great pressure. The black saber weighed 570 kilograms. It had the sharpness of a saber emperor. Moreover, Dong Wuxiang's mighty aura was like that of a heavenly god. Moreover, his fearless fighting style had successfully narrowed the gap between the two at this moment. Dong Wuxiang's first saber attack was blocked by Li Changlong's sword. His sword shattered with a clang sound. Dong Wuxiang's 7 apertures fiercely spurted out blood. However, Dong Wuxiang didn't stop. He held his saber with both hands, and the second saber attack arrived. Li Changlong roared. His entire body emitted a boundless white aura. Then he met the attack with his bare palm. His left palm came in contact with the saber's edge. Then he retreated a step and met the saber with his right palm. He continuously retreated 7 steps. His pure white palm blocked the sharp saber's edge when he launched the 7th palm attack. Then he fiercely counterattacked. The black saber was shaken and flipped upwards. Dong Wuxiang's eyes were like bells. He roared, and the webbing between his thumb and forefinger ruptured. Then the 3rd saber attack broke through the air and hacked down. Selfless, merciless saber. Dong Wuxiang had unleashed the merciless saber to the extreme. His saber attack was mixed with all his essence, energy, and spirit. The opponent couldn't evade it. They could only meet it head-on. They could only meet it head-on. Li Changlong screamed. His body started to rotate. Countless palms came out of his body and met the saber's edge. The 4th saber attack. The 5th saber attack. Dong Wuxiang faced upwards and roared. A round column of blood spurted out of his mouth. Then his clothes suddenly fluttered in the wind. He held his saber with both hands in midair. Then he used his own life to hack the saber attack. Li Changlong roared. He knew that this was his opponent's last saber attack. So, he fiercely stimulated his primary power and fiercely clapped his palms. However, he had neglected the fact that his hands had been hacked by the saber for hundreds of times. His hands hadn't been hacked into pieces because of his emperor-level strength and domain. However, they were already riddled with scars. He had stimulated all his potential at this moment. And his hands suddenly looked like fountains. Thin wisps of blood had appeared on them. Li Changlong was gobsmacked. He hastily retreated. However, it was too late. Dong Wuxiang's saber attack had arrived. Li Changlong roared. He had no choice but to meet it with his palms. Li Changlong screamed with a kacha sound. His palms were hacked into pieces. The saber attack continued. He didn't have enough time to retreat. His arms were shattered. The saber edge continued to press down. His shoulders were shattered. The saber hacked down again. His sternum was shattered. Dong Wuxiang let out a long and loud shout. The overwhelming saber energy surged into Li Changlong's internal organs in an unstoppable manner. Li Changlong screamed. Then he suddenly became startled, as if he had received an electric shock. His eyes opened wide. His gaze was blank. It seemed as if all his life's experiences were replaying in his mind at this moment. The hardships of his youth, the joy of his engagement, and the struggles of his youth. He had followed his master and embarked on the road of Jianghu without looking back that day. He had heard someone crying behind him that day. He had killed his way into Jianghu step by step. He had climbed up step by step, and had become a high immortal step by step. However, he had suddenly looked back. And he had lost the motivation that had supported him. He had returned to see a lonely grave and boundless weeds. Pen. He had been poisoned by the aphrodisiac. But he had no taboos. He had fallen. Would he still be me? Would he still be the me that Pan had bitterly longed for all her life? I'm going to go. But, do I still have the face to see her? How could she still accept my body, which was filled with filth? A man in the world has thousands of paths. But he mustn't take a wrong step. Li Changlong stood up in disappointment and frustration. His body had been shattered. His internal organs had been shattered into fine powder. However, he didn't seem to feel anything. He muttered, "There's no way back if I take a wrong step. I won't be able to turn back even if I go to the netherworld." Li Changlong sighed in disappointment and frustration. Sigh. It seemed as if he had sighed all the sufferings of his life. Suddenly, Li Changlong's eyes, which had lost all their luster, brightened. It seemed as if there was a peasant girl in the dark. Her simple and honest face was flickering with hope. She was wearing a patterned cotton-padded jacket. Her eyes were sparkling with happiness. She was running towards him with small and quick steps. It seemed as if a wife who had been waiting for thousands of years was welcoming her lover. Li Changlong suddenly became happy. He muttered, "Have you forgiven me?" Dong Wuxiang thought that Li Changlong was talking to him. So, he was puzzled. What? Li Changlong ignored him. A trace of childlike innocence and happiness flashed across the corners of his aged lips as he said, "Have you come to welcome me? Am I dirty?" His voice was getting lower and lower. In fact, Dong Wuxiang had to tilt his ear to hear him. He was about to ask when he heard Li Changlong sigh in satisfaction. Then he giggled and said, "Pan Pan, I'm very happy." Dong Wuxiang wanted to listen again. However, he found that Li Changlong had stopped breathing. The face of the dead emperor-level expert still had boundless satisfaction. However, there was also a kind of apprehensive guilt in his heart. It seemed as if he was pleasantly surprised that someone had forgiven him. He was also ashamed of his mistakes. But he was still happy in the end. He was dead. Dong Wuxiang shook his head. He only felt a little dizzy. He muttered, "A man in the world must never take a wrong step. There's no way back if he takes a wrong step. He won't be able to turn back even if he goes to the netherworld." He then shook his head and said in a low voice, "Sun Tzu, you need to turn back. But I only need to go forward. I don't need to turn back." Dong Wuxiang only felt pain all over his body now that the enemy was gone. His body felt as light as a feather. He didn't have the least bit of strength left. He staggered and almost fell to the ground. The black saber fell from his hand with a clang. Suddenly, he heard a voice say, "Wuxiang, open your mouth." "Big brother?" Dong Wuxiang raised his drowsy head. "Where are you? Am I hallucinating?" A pill suddenly went into his mouth with a puff sound. Then, a familiar fragrance suddenly drilled into his nostrils. His whole body felt comfortable. Gu Duxing's figure was drifting. He was facing all the enemies around him. But his mind seemed to be floating. He had taken out his sword, but had forgotten about it. He had forgotten about the enemy. He had forgotten about the fight. He had forgotten about the world. Only his lonely self was left. Solitary swordsman, unruffled swordsmanship. Gu Duxing's body was drifting here and there as if he was sleepwalking. Even his gaze was sharp and vacant. His black dragon sword also seemed to be sleepwalking. However, the sword light was flickering. The seemingly soft sword light was like lightning and thunder. It blossomed with brilliant bloody light on the throats of the enemies one after another. He was like a blind man who had lost his memory. He was dancing without consciousness in a weightless space. But he would inevitably take away a life every time he raised his hand. My neck was stiff. It woke me up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I didn't dare to look down. After sitting for a while, I simply started to write. I straightened my neck like a zombie and looked at the screen. I had actually completed a chapter. I quickly wrote it and went to the hospital. Today, I will stay in the hospital for a while. At the very least, I have to treat my neck first. Sigh, it's really 100 sorrows. This chapter is still very proudly written. Moreover, I realized that there are few updates recently. But the quality of each chapter is not bad. Because I have more time to think, the plot is also much better. These fighting scenes have already appeared in my mind when I was lying down. I just have to edit it when I write it out. Chapter 654. Gu Duxing's figure flew up along with the swordlight. The swordlight swallowed and spat out like lightning. Ao Yu Yun screamed, and softly fell down. A big hole had been opened in his throat. The guards on the side crazily rushed over. Gu Duxing didn't seem to have realized that he had killed an important person. He also didn't feel that the enemies were crazily rushing over from all directions. His body turned around as light as a feather, and rushed in another direction like lightning. The shadows of people screamed and fell down wherever the sword light went. His body had suffered heavy blows in succession. But he was still immersed in this strange state. He was crazily harvesting people's lives, a bold and powerful silhouette suddenly rose up and chopped down with a big saber. Another Gong Ao Ching Yun of the Ao clan didn't get enough time to scream. He was cut into two halves from head to toe. It seemed as if two pieces of pork were about to be put on the rack. They were dripping with blood. The people of the Ao clan had finally gone completely crazy. Two Gong Ao Ching Yun had died in the blink of an eye. So, these people had gone all out. They had started to fight with their lives on the line. After all, the people of the Xie clan were too few at present. So, they were fighting close to the inner circle. The eyes of the black-clothed and masked leader of the Zhuge clan flickered. He seemed somewhat nervous as he took a step forward. His eyes were firmly fixed on Tan Tan's mass of black fog. "Big brother, it seems that something is wrong." Another black-clothed and masked man frowned. He was puzzled as he said, "How did the situation suddenly reverse? These people of the Xie clan are only a few in number. But they are now evenly matched. Moreover, 3 of the top emperor-level experts of the Ao clan have died in the blink of an eye. But the other side hasn't suffered a single casualty. Instead, they are becoming more and more courageous." The eyes of the black-clothed and masked leader shrank. He muttered to himself irresolutely, "Second brother, have you noticed? The people of the Xie clan seem to have turned into unkillable monsters since that awakened one's body started to soar with that black fog." "Big brother, do you mean?" That black-clothed and masked man said in shock, "That mass of black fog is strange?" "I'm afraid so." The black-clothed masked leader said, "Awakened ones can only have one bloodline awakening every few thousand years. And this one should be a king bloodline awakening. If I'm not wrong, that black fog should have an extreme healing effect on their own people. If that's the case, then the harvest this time will be even greater than expected." The eyes of the leader of the black-clothed and masked men became more and more fervent. "Fortunately, we did our best this time and captured an important figure of the divine clan. Only then did we learn this shocking secret. Otherwise, if we let this person grow, it would definitely be a terrible disaster." Another black-clothed and masked man came over. Then, he carefully said, "Big brother, I have always felt that this matter is too fishy. I had already mentioned it to the elders when we were in the upper 3 heavens. But I still want to say it now. This matter shouldn't be so simple. If the 3 stars divine clan's bloodline awakens in the human world every few thousand years, then why has it never appeared before? Perhaps it's unknown if it died prematurely." The leader of the black-clothed and masked men didn't care. He said, "After all, the awakened ones are very weak before they awaken, and even for a long period of time after they awaken. Let's not talk about you and me. Even if we brothers don't make a move, we can still destroy this person 1,000 times over. Moreover, you can say these words in front of me. But you must never say them again." The leader of the black-clothed and masked men sternly looked at his third brother. "Do you know that this is in the upper 3 heavens? Do you know where this information came from?" He snorted and said, "The great elder didn't hesitate to consume his lifespan after he captured that person of the 3 stars divine clan. He used the needle to destroy the consciousness of that expert of the divine clan twice in a day. Then he got this little bit of information. Because of this, the great elder lost years of his lifespan. How can this be a small matter? The great elder is already over 1,700 years old this year. He knows that he won't live for long. So, he took the initiative to use this needle to obtain the most secret information for the clan. Do you doubt it? What do you think of the great elder? The needle of the remnant soul needle can't withstand it even if it's a saint-level treasure, let alone using it on a person twice in a row? If this information is false, then it can only be said that this is the will of the heavens." He looked at his brother with sharp eyes. "You're not allowed to mention this matter in the future. Otherwise, don't blame me for not caring about brotherhood." That black-clothed and masked man was sweating profusely. He complied and withdrew. The leader of the black-clothed and masked men gazed in Tan Tan's direction. He insipidly said, "Prepare the slaughtering spirit arrows, capturing soul powder, severing spirit powder, soul-breaking flute, and spirit-lifting net. That awakened one will start to attack once he awakens successfully. Moreover, his body will emit black fog in the process of attacking. The brothers replied in unison. They were in high spirits. Then, each of them held one or several small but strangely shaped objects in their hands. The leader of the black-clothed and masked men held a purple crystal jade bottle in his left and right hands. A strange powder could be faintly seen inside the bottle. These 5 killing weapons, soul-slaughtering arrow, soul-seizing powder, soul-severing powder, soul-shattering flute, and soul-lifting net, were the most effective methods to deal with and subdue the awakened after capturing the main figure of the sacred clan and learning about the awakened ones. These 5 slaughtering weapons were refined from highly toxic poisons. Even the experts of the Zhuge clan were shocked to see such a refining method. Moreover, the materials were extremely difficult to find and extremely precious. Therefore, no one doubted that there was anything wrong with such a clear procedure under such cruel methods. The battle was getting more and more intense at this time. It was approaching the white-hot stage. Chu Yang threw the last incomplete version of the heavy pill into Gu Duxing's mouth. Outside the forest, the sound of horse hooves was getting closer and closer. The experts of the Ao clan had become even crazier. They were charging towards the protective circle formed by Dong Wushang and the others. They were attacking in a suicidal manner. Everyone was already exhausted, but the current situation of the battle had become even more tragic. The faces of the remaining 2 brothers, Ao Mengyun and Ao Langyun, were filled with despair and madness. They had never thought that they would end up in such a tragic situation even though they had such an advantage in military strength. They obviously had a formidable external aid. But their external aid had suddenly and inexplicably disappeared at the most critical juncture of life and death. This would make people vomit blood until they died. Chu Yang quietly moved on the other side. He took advantage of the dim light of the night and the cover of the trees and bushes, and silently arrived under a big tree. The calamity sword stabbed out like a viper. This was the place where the 8th grade emperor-level expert, Kai Shaoqing, had been sent flying by Xie Zhiqiu's palm. He had suffered serious internal injuries because of that palm. His 5 internal organs had been displaced, and more than half of his ribs had been broken. He was circulating his martial power with all his strength to heal his injuries. White fog was pervading around him. It was making whooshing sounds. It seemed that he had reached a critical juncture. There were 2 first-grade emperor-level experts on his left and right sides. They were nervously guarding him. Kai Shaoqing would be able to break through the Xie clan's crumbling defense circle in one fell swoop as long as he could recover. Even the people in the fierce battle hadn't expected that there would be a key person here who could change the situation of the battle by raising his hand. But how could Chu Yang not think of this? How could he allow an 8th grade emperor-level expert like Kai Shaoqing to destroy the advantageous situation that he had created with great difficulty? He had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Minister Chu would make his move only at the critical juncture when he couldn't afford to be distracted. The 2 emperor-level experts who were guarding Kai Shaoqing beamed with joy when they saw that he was about to recover. A dull and tiny sound echoed at this moment. The tip of a sword penetrated the big tree behind Kai Shaoqing. Then, it flashed like a viper and shrank back. The white spirit energy that was rapidly revolving around Kai Shaoqing's body suddenly exploded and scattered in all directions with a bang sound. Then, he opened his mouth and fiercely spouted a mouthful of blood. The blood splashed on the ground and made a deep bloody hole. Kai Shaoqing's expression was mournful. He angrily roared, "Scoundrel! Come out!" His voice had become hoarse by the time he had spoken the last word. He was spitting out mouthfuls of blood. And he was spitting out pieces of his internal organs. It seemed as if his internal organs had become a pot of porridge. Emperor-level expert Kai? The 2 men cried out in fear. However, Kai Shaoqing couldn't hear them. His neck hung down softly. He had lost all his vitality at this moment. His body slowly fell forward and fell into the blood he had spat out with a bang sound. A thin sword mark could be seen on his back. The tyrannical sword energy had broken into Kai Shaoqing's internal organs, and had smashed his internal organs into pieces when he was at his weakest. Who is it? The two Emperor-level experts crazily jumped up. They rushed into the woods with their swords. The sword light crisscrossed, and the fragments of vegetation swirled in the air. But they didn't see anything. It was as if there was a ghost in the underworld that had stabbed this extremely insidious sword and then disappeared after that. The two men searched several laps, but found nothing. They turned around in a daze and looked at the corpse of Emperor-level expert Kai lying on the ground. His eyes were wide open, and he hadn't died in peace. But his eyes were unexpectedly filled with anger. They felt powerless in an instant. In fact, they nearly fell to the ground. 3 of the 4 8th-grade Emperor-level experts had perished, and the remaining one was being suppressed by Xie Zhiqiu. He was in imminent danger and wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. AO clan had dispatched 100 experts this time, but there were less than 10 people left now. Could it be that the younger generation of AO clan will be buried here tonight? AO clan had begun its final attack like a raging tide. AO Meng Yun and AO Lang Yun roared. They took the lead and rushed forward. Gu Duxing and the others could recover with the help of the heavy pills. But they had traveled a long and arduous journey, and they had been fighting until now. So, they couldn't bear it any longer. Xie Zhiqiu was still in an advantageous position while facing the enemy's final attack. But everyone else was retreating step by step. The defensive line was in imminent danger, and it was about to be broken. However, at this moment, suddenly the bang sound was heard, and the dense black fog that had been floating around Tan Tan's body suddenly exploded. Chapter 655. Suddenly, a loud explosion was heard. The dense black fog that had been floating around Tan Tan's body suddenly exploded. A black shadow suddenly appeared. Tan Tan's body seemed to have grown taller at this moment. The black robe that he was wearing gave people a feeling that it was extremely fitting. That strange mark on his forehead was already half complete, and was flashing with light. His facial features were still the same as before, but they seemed to have added a lot of charm to them for some unknown reason. No one felt that he was ugly at this moment. It was unknown when the headband on his head had broken. His shiny jet black hair was smoothly parted and hung straight down to his chest, and it exposed a perfectly straight hairline. It was such a smooth and glossy hair that gave everyone a sinister and ruthless feeling. Moreover, it gave rise to a feeling of recovery from the vicissitudes of life. This sudden loud sound startled everyone on the battlefield. Their eyes had turned red from killing. They couldn't help but stop. Tan Tan slowly walked out. His movements were very strange. The first 3 steps that he had taken seemed somewhat out of place. He felt very uncoordinated. Therefore, he stopped after taking 3 steps. Then he lowered his head and looked at his legs in astonishment. His eyebrows, one high and one low, slightly wrinkled. Then his eyebrows started to move backward. He frowned and looked at his body in dissatisfaction. He then muttered, "So awkward." Then he stretched out his hands and shook them. A black fog that was visible to the naked eye suddenly dispersed. Then his parted long hair suddenly rose up along with the vibration of his arms. It seemed as if the roots of the seaweed at the bottom of the sea had suddenly swayed up. Then his entire body suddenly twisted. It twisted in a very strange manner. A burst of crackling sounds came from his body. It was a sound that made people's teeth ache. Everyone who heard this sound clearly felt that the bones of Tan Tan's entire body had been dislocated at this moment. Then, their order had been disrupted, and they had been reorganized. Then he raised his arms and his hair fell down. It was still parted in a soft manner. It had a gloomy and desolate taste. He lowered his arm and raised his head. Xie Danfeng was beside him at this moment. She could clearly feel that Tan Tan had suddenly grown taller at this moment. It was at least 2 inches taller than before. Xie Danfeng didn't know why, but a strange feeling slowly rose in her heart. This feeling terrified Xie Danfeng to the extreme. Her eyes stung and she felt like crying. But she didn't know why she was crying. He only felt terrible in his heart, as if his heart was broken. Tan Tan raised his head and twisted his neck. His neck also made a cracking sound. He twisted his head to the left, then to the right, and then straightened his head. His actions were very comical, but no one dared to laugh. In fact, when he did these actions, everyone felt a sudden chill in their hearts. Even Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang felt their hearts tremble violently and coldly, along with Tan Tan's movements. Then, Tan Tan took the fourth step. But this fourth step felt very different from the first 3 steps. He gently took this step and gently landed on the ground. In fact, the grass on the ground didn't even shake much. However, the people of Ao clan in front of him clearly felt that the earth had split open and the sky had turned upside down with this step. The surroundings were quiet. But these people of Ao clan clearly felt that the end of the world had arrived before their eyes. The mountains had collapsed, and the water on the ground had rushed up to the sky. The clouds and mist in the sky had been torn apart. It seemed as if a big hole had appeared in the blue sky. And there was a black-clothed figure in front of all this. His long hair hung down, and his eyes were cold and detached. He was looking at the common people of the world with indifference. He was standing with his hands clasped behind his back. A sovereign descending to the world. This wasn't the kind of sovereign descending to the world that belonged to an emperor. Instead, it was a kind of sovereign descending to the world, a supreme sovereign descending to the world. Tan Tan took the 5th step. Ao Mengyun, who was at the front, suddenly felt that a magnificent mountain was coming down from the top of his head. It was unknown what he was thinking. But his knees suddenly went soft and he knelt down with a plop sound. He knelt down in front of Tan Tan. The strangest thing was that the people of Ao clan who had seen all this didn't feel anything wrong from the bottom of their hearts. It seemed that the young master kneeling down in front of this person was a matter of course. Even if the young master didn't kneel down, these people would have kicked his legs and made him kneel down. How could he not kneel in front of this person? This was simply disgraceful. Tan Tan indifferently looked at Ao Mengyun in front of him. It seemed as if he hadn't seen this big living person kneeling in front of him. He finally calmly stood still with his hands clasped behind his back. He slightly raised his head and slowly swept his eyes all around. Then he cast his gaze towards a distant place. He indifferently looked around and then withdrew his gaze. The 4 monarch-level experts of Zhuge clan who had been standing far away made eye contact with him. They didn't feel anything unusual. However, they suddenly felt that their hearts had started to beat again after he had shifted his gaze away. Their mouths started to beat more and more violently. The faces of the 4 people turned red in an instant. They hadn't felt anything a moment ago. But even their heartbeats had been controlled by the other party's indifferent gaze. The 4 people looked at each other and suddenly became aghast in their hearts. How can this person who awakened the watermark of departure be so powerful? Isn't it said that the bloodline of the 3 Stars Divine Clan has awakened the watermark of departure? It's as if a devil king has come to the world? A faint feeling arose in the hearts of the 4 people at this moment. Could it be that we've been tricked? However, this doubt in the hearts of the 4 people vanished like smoke in thin air after Tan Tan had shifted his gaze for a while. Motherfucker! We have 5 big killing weapons in our hands. Can't we deal with a small bloodline awakener who has awakened the watermark of departure? This kind of change in thinking was simply unforgivable in the eyes of a monarch-level expert. But this was a real change in thinking. Chu Yang was hidden in the dark. He felt that Tan Tan's gaze was clearly looking at him. Moreover, this gaze seemed to be shining into the depths of his heart. He couldn't help but shiver in his heart. Could it be that Tan Tan has finally started that kind of change? The sword spirit was crazily shocked in the tangled space. He loudly said, "What kind of power is this? This is a devil. This is clearly the power of a devil king." Chu Yang's heart sank. Tan Tan finally stopped sweeping his gaze. Then he suddenly took a long breath. This breath sucked the space of the entire forest into a vacuum. Everyone felt as if they were suffocating when he took this breath. Then, Tan Tan let out a disappointed and frustrated sigh. He muttered in an apathetic and low voice, This world has truly changed. Then he sighed again and said to himself, I'm too weak. Then he looked at the remaining 58 people of the Ao clan in front of him. He frowned and said, I've been forced to this point by these ants? The corners of his mouth curled up as he said this. And he faintly smiled. In this indifferent and mocking smile, there was clearly contempt towards the entire heavenly layer. He was looking at these people from behind. But even Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang could feel that Tan Tan was standing on the summit of the highest mountain in the world and was overlooking them. Then, Tan Tan extended his hand and gently placed his 5 fingers on Ao Meng Yun's head. He stroked Ao Meng Yun's hair and indifferently said, This sacrifice is too weak, so weak that it's frightening. Ao Meng Yun's entire body trembled. His vital part was being stroked as if he was a puppy. But he couldn't even muster the will to resist. He issued a muffled whimper like a dying puppy. Tan Tan raised his hand. He raised his hand and lifted Ao Meng Yun's head from his neck without making any sound. In fact, he lifted it up from his neck to the other side in a neat manner. It seemed as if this head had been chopped off with a sharp knife a long time ago. And it had been placed on top of his head at the moment. The head was gone. However, the neck was still intact. In fact, not even a drop of blood had come out. Tan Tan grabbed the head and frowned as he looked at it. Then he casually threw it away. The blood in Ao Meng Yun's neck suddenly rushed up to the sky. This is the smell of blood, Tan Tan said indifferently. He looked at the gorgeous blood in front of him and said with nostalgia, I haven't smelled it for many years. He frowned in disappointment and frustration. Then he grabbed Ao Lang Yun again. Ao Lang Yun was 3 people away from him. But Ao Lang Yun had arrived in his hand in a flash. Then he effortlessly grabbed Ao Lang Yun's head. He made Ao Lang Yun stand at attention in front of him. Then he twisted Ao Lang Yun's head twice. Ao Lang Yun was being grabbed by him like a puppet. It seemed as if his feet were rooted to the ground. However, Chu Yang had easily twisted Ao Lang Yun's body from his ankles all the way to the top of his skull and had turned it into a huge fried dough twist. His clothes, his muscles, his bones, and even his skull had been twisted. Every part of his skull had been twisted into a spiral. Ao Lang Yun died without uttering a single word. But a kacha sound was unceasingly echoing from his body. In fact, it sounded very rhythmic. Tan Tan twisted Ao Lang Yun's head twice. Then he frowned and slightly tilted his head to listen to the rhythmic sound of bones breaking. He insipidly said, I heard it again. The bones of the people of this world haven't changed. He raised his head and faintly smiled. Then he said, This was a piece of music a long time ago. And I named it White Bone Order. He explained calmly as if he was explaining to himself, as long as you use a very stable force to twist a person into a very uniform fried dough twist from head to toe, you will be able to play a melodious tune that will make all of the 78,453,333 hairs on your body stand up automatically after listening to it. I haven't heard it for a long time. Tan Tan smiled in a somewhat gratified manner. Then he said in a somewhat nostalgic manner. He licked his lips and tilted his head. Then he imitated that sound with his mouth. He squinted his eyes and softly said, Kachajia, Kachajia, Kachajia. Chapter 656. Everyone looked at him in a daze. It seemed as if they had been struck by lightning. They couldn't help but feel cold all over. And their teeth started to chatter. Then, Tan Tan took a step forward. He entered the encirclement of the remaining experts of the Ao clan. He frowned and said, You lowly humans are making me very unhappy. Then he stretched out his hands with the color of his black robe. He stretched out his left hand, and the body of a person on the left side spiraled like a cloud. Then he raised his right hand, and that person flew out like a rubber ball. His body suddenly exploded in midair. And it scattered into a bloody paste in the sky. Then he kicked 3 times with bang sounds, and 3 people turned into meteors. Unexpectedly, no one dared to resist. He walked among the 50 people of the Ao clan in this manner. His face was still indifferent, and his eyes didn't have the slightest ripple. However, with just a wave of his hand, he had sent these arrogant and domineering experts to hell one by one. The remaining 20 or so people were trembling from head to toe. Their eyes were filled with fear. It seemed as if they were fiercely fighting against an invisible devil in their hearts. Finally, one of them roared, "Ah!" He shouted towards the sky with all his might. His voice was full of fear. He was terrified to the extreme. This shout seemed to have awakened everyone. Everyone began to scatter and flee in all directions. They were battered and exhausted, and were stumbling about. Tan Tan chased after them in a neither fast nor slow manner. It seemed as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. His movements were very slow. In fact, a kind of natural elegance was seeping out of his bones every time he raised his hand or lifted his foot. It seemed as if he was a poet who was brimming with poetic sentiments. He was strolling in a picturesque grove under the illumination of the morning sun. And he was composing poems in his heart. However, he had killed more than 50 people of the Ao clan in such an elegant place. That last 8th grade emperor-level expert had already run several thousand feet away. However, Tan Tan was still standing in the same place. Everyone thought that he would let that guy go. However, Tan Tan suddenly raised his head towards the distance and insipidly said, "Did I let you go?" It was just this one sentence, but it seemed to carry a kind of strange magical power. Everyone's heart violently trembled. A layer of strange ripples was visible to the naked eye in the air between Tan Tan and that 8th grade emperor-level expert. That 8th grade emperor-level expert was madly running away in the distance. But he suddenly jolted and stopped. He stood there in a daze, like a sculpture that had lost its soul. "Still not coming back?" Tan Tan asked. His voice had barely faded when that 8th grade emperor-level expert in the distance obediently turned around and walked back step by step. His eyes were lifeless, and his complexion was lifeless. Everyone's jaws dropped to the ground in shock. What was going on? It didn't take long for that emperor-level expert to walk back like a puppet. He then stood in front of Tan Tan in a daze. "Good girl," Tan Tan said, "since you're so obedient." He stretched out his hand and pointed, "Go there, kneel down and kowtow until you die." Everyone looked towards the source of the sound, only to see a large rock sticking out of the ground. They could not help but feel a sense of disbelief in their hearts. However, that 8th grade emperor-level expert turned around while swaying. Then he walked towards that stone. He walked to the front of the stone and adjusted the distance between them. Then he knelt down. He adjusted his body so that he could knock his head on the stone. Then he fiercely kowtowed. Bang! Blood splashed. Bang! Bang bang bang! This 8th grade emperor-level expert had knocked himself into a skeleton in front of everyone's eyes. Bang! This emperor-level expert's body softly bent down with the last sound. Then, his head gently fell down from his neck with a bang, and rolled to the other side of the big rock. A glaring blood-red color was left on the stone. He actually knocked his own head off his body. Tan Tan had been holding his hands behind his back during this crazy and strange process. His eyes were somewhat lonely, and he was somewhat sighing as he looked towards the distant sky. He didn't move. Everyone felt a heavy pressure in their hearts. But no one spoke. Xie Danfeng's muffled sobs were heard from behind. Tan Tan exhaled after a long time. He finally turned around. The first person he saw was Gu Du Xingyu. "Very good," Tan Tan praised. Then he looked at Dong Wushang and insipidly said, "You're also very good." Then he pondered for a moment, "All of you are very good." Then, as if he was very unwilling, he still said, "I owe you a lot." Even Xie Zhiqiu, a first-grade monarch-level expert, couldn't help but feel flattered from the bottom of his heart when he said these words. Gu Du Xing and Dong Wushang were the closest to Tan Tan. So, they started to breathe heavily when they heard these words. Pure Sword Emperor and Pure Saber Emperor. Both of them were the world's first-class people with superhuman perseverance. The reason why Sword Emperor and Saber Emperor were powerful was because of their obsession. And in this aspect, Dong Wushang and Gu Duxing were definitely the best of the best. However, they didn't feel flattered. Instead, they suddenly became furious. That furious mood quickly spread throughout their bodies once it rose from their hearts. Dong Wushang fiercely glared at him. It seemed as if two saber lights had condensed from them. He then asked, "What do you mean?" This sentence was said in an extremely low voice, as though he was still being suppressed by that imposing manner. But when he said the last word, when that interrogative tone came out, Dong Wushang's fury had already reached an uncontrollable level. He asked again loudly, "What do you mean?" It was the same sentence. The first sentence had been as soft as a mosquito's buzzing. But the second sentence had exploded like a spring thunder. The entire forest had been shaken by this sentence and had started to buzz. Gu Duxing was a lot calmer in comparison. He only focused his gaze on Tan Tan. "You said this sentence? This sentence, is it something you can say?" Tan Tan rolled his eyes and looked at the two of them. It seemed as if he wanted to get angry. But he restrained himself in the end. Then he insipidly and disdainfully said, "It's just two parts of a sword." He had said this sentence in a very low voice. So much so that even Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang hadn't carefully heard every word. But their arrogance and disdain were very clear. The two of them flew into a rage. "Bastard!" Dong Wushang angrily shouted, "I risked my life to rush over 2,000 miles to rescue you. And you owe me a debt of gratitude? Who do you think you are? Do you think I want your debt of gratitude?" Gu Duxing didn't shout angrily. He only looked at Tan Tan's face and coldly said, "I don't know who you are. Or, the debt of gratitude you're talking about is something you think is very important and precious. But I only want to say one thing right now." Tan Tan had wanted to get angry when he heard Dong Wushang's words. But he heard Gu Duxing's words again. So he asked insipidly, "What is it?" "Get out of this body." The sword light in Gu Duxing's eyes blazed brightly. He shouted like a thunderbolt, "You've defiled my brother's corpse. Get out." Gu Duxing rarely cursed. But he had cursed today. Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang had always known that Tan Tan had many secrets. In fact, Chu Yang had once said that there might be a strange and powerful soul in Tan Tan's body. Or it might be about to awaken. Chu Yang had only told Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang about this matter. Chu Yang had said that day, "Don't blame Tan Tan if there comes a day." Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang knew that the person in front of them wasn't Tan Tan since Tan Tan had appeared with this appearance today. Or, it should be said that it was an ancient and powerful soul. Tan Tan was startled. Then his eyes turned dark. Two clusters of strange and dangerous sparks flashed in his pupils. Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang weren't afraid. They stood upright and coldly looked at Tan Tan's eyes. One of them was holding the sword hilt, and the other was holding the saber hilt. "Clearly, we'll fight if you want to fight." "Are you Tan Tan?" A sad and melancholic voice resounded. A delicate figure staggered over from behind Tan Tan along with this voice. She was bleeding all over. Her face was pale and ashen. But she stubbornly refused to let anyone support her. She staggered closer. She was very careful. She was very sad. She was very nervous. She was very expectant. But she was also very dejected as she asked, "Are you Tan Tan? Are you my Tan Tan?" Tan Tan's body seemed to shake. His body was still standing upright. He was motionless. He didn't turn his head. "Turn your head around." Xie Dan Feng stubbornly said, "Turn your head around." "Are you my Tan Tan?" Tan Tan's body was still standing upright. He was as motionless as a mountain. But Dong Wushang and Gu Duxing could clearly see that there was a fierce struggle in his eyes. "Give me back my Tan Tan." Xie Dan Feng suddenly seemed to have understood something when she saw that the other party hadn't turned his head around. She suddenly burst out with a roar. Then she pounced forward. She firmly grabbed Tan Tan's shoulders with both hands. She then shouted in grief, "Give me back my Tan Tan." Then she ferociously bit down. She bit down in desperation. It seemed as if she wanted to tear this body to shreds. Xie Dan Feng was heartbroken. Her family had been destroyed. But she hadn't collapsed. She hadn't lost her faith even though she had been chased for thousands of miles. That was because she had him by her side. She had fallen into a desperate situation a moment ago. But Tan Tan's roar had given her the sweetest feeling of love in her life. Woman, remember, you'll die after I die. No one is allowed to hurt her as long as I'm alive. Old bastard, you dared to hit my wife. Xie Dan Feng clearly knew that death was imminent at that time. But she still felt sweet and happy in her heart. In fact, she even believed that no other woman in the world could be happier than her at that moment. But her enemies were all dead in the blink of an eye. She didn't have to die. But the person she loved deeply had suddenly changed. He had turned into a demon king. He was very powerful. He had saved everyone. But he wasn't the person she loved deeply. He wasn't. Where did my Tan Tan go? Can he come back? Xie Dan Feng was terrified in despair. She ferociously bit down. She crazily hammered, punched, and kicked. It seemed as if she wanted to use this method to wake her lover up. He's very powerful now. But I don't want him. Tan Tan Yan's expression changed drastically. Suddenly, the world seemed to darken. Gu Duxing's heart trembled. The shining mark on Tan Tan's forehead suddenly went out. Then, this fuck. A voice was heard as he clenched his teeth. He sucked in cold air with hissing sounds. Then he shouted while enduring the extreme pain, "Little girl, you're biting me to death. Go fuck. Ouch, it hurts." Chapter 657. Tan Tan's body trembled under the watchful eyes of everyone. His eyebrows began to twitch up and down. He clenched his teeth, and his entire face convulsed in pain. Tears flowed out of his eyes and gushed out. Hiss. Hiss, you little girl. Spare me. Ancestor Xieji Qiu, who had the highest cultivation, was dumbfounded as he looked at this scene. He suddenly sat down on the ground and wiped the cold sweat on his head. He moaned, "Ouch." That day, the atmosphere had been extremely oppressive. But it immediately relaxed after Tan Tan's miserable cry. Gu Duxing and the others exposed a trace of a smile on the corners of their mouths. His taut muscles finally relaxed. The powerful enemy had turned into smoke. How could they not relax when only their own people were left? Both of them looked at each other and saw the cold sweat on each other's heads. Both of them still had a lingering fear from that terrifying coercion a moment ago. But at that time, they all erupted at the same time without prior agreement. Moreover, they had been so angry that they couldn't restrain themselves. "You are powerful. But you're not my brother. I'm willing to have a weak brother, but I'm not willing to have you. I would have been envious if my brother was as powerful as you. I would have been happy. I would have been very safe. Moreover, he would have become the goal that I would have pursued. But you're not." Tan Tan's matter had obviously given Gu Duxing and the others a fierce wake-up call. Both of them knew that Tan Tan had been forced to wake up. Or, it could be said that this was the first time that the Demon King had awakened. So, the power wasn't great. Therefore, Tan Tan had been able to wake up. But would Tan Tan have woken up if that power had been enough? Both of them had relaxed. But their hearts had also faintly tightened. This kind of thing, who knows if it will happen again? However, Tan Tan's awakening had also reminded Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang. So, a true powerhouse is like this. A true powerhouse is like this. My previous goal was too small. Too small. Such a powerhouse has appeared before. So, he must exist. So, why can't I do it? It was also from this moment onwards that Gu Duxing and the other brothers had a deep impression of becoming such strong experts in their hearts. They had thought about it in the past. But this concept had been too vague. Even though he had seen supreme beings like Bu Luqing and Ning Tianya, he had seen them before. However, those two supreme martial artists didn't really make a move. The most important thing was that they didn't really kill anyone. Only now did he realize that the so-called experts were actually so terrifying. Xie Dan Feng smiled through her tears when she saw that Tan Tan had woken up. She smiled and angrily hugged Tan Tan. She was so happy that she wept. "You're back, you're back?" Her heavily injured body couldn't withstand such intense stimulation. So, she softly fainted. Tan Tan forced a smile and tightly hugged Xie Danfeng's body. No one had noticed that a faint and gloomy luster had quietly passed away in the depths of Tan Tan's eyes. Then, a trace of conflicting pain had quietly flashed through his eyes. This was an extreme pain, a deep sorrow. He hugged Xie Danfeng as if this was the only time he could hug her in this lifetime. He hugged her tightly. His eyes were full of reluctance, but there was nothing he could do. He wanted to cry out loud, but now was clearly not the time to be sad. And it would only make everyone more worried. He clearly remembered everything that had happened in that moment just now. He could clearly feel that there was a change of master in the depths of his heart. But it wasn't like that. Instead, he had suddenly changed. That person and that soul were powerful and ruthless. But Tan Tan had a clear feeling that it was him. And it was absolutely not another person. The so-called two souls were simply not the same. That was really me. But how did I become like that? Tan Tan could feel that kind of power had suddenly emerged from his body. Then, a kind of cruel and indifferent emotion had dominated his body. Tan Tan desperately wanted to seize control of this body. But he also felt at the same time, I am the one who is controlling this body. This was a kind of inexplicable and extremely contradictory emotion. Moreover, he clearly felt that these two emotions were quietly fusing together. This feeling was even stranger. It was as if a person was living well. But he was suddenly hit by a heavy blow and became an idiot. Everything that had happened in the past would no longer exist. Therefore, he had started to learn from the beginning since he had awakened. He had begun to form a new character, a new style of doing things, and a new life. But the memory that had been sealed after the heavy blow had suddenly begun to awaken on this day. Both of them were fiercely attacking each other. But they were also cautiously tolerating each other. Both of them wanted to be the master. But they couldn't let each other disappear. Tan was extremely sad. He held Xie Danfeng's soft body as if he was holding the most precious treasure in the world. And this treasure, he would lose it in the next moment. If that kind of power and character were to completely awaken, would I still have Xie Danfeng? Would I still have Chu Yang as my brothers? Tan Tan's entire body trembled in fear. That was because he had come to a conclusion. I'm afraid. I can't. The powerful enemy was gone. Everyone relaxed. Their tense nerves suddenly relaxed, and everyone felt as if they were about to die. They couldn't help but sit down and begin to treat their wounds. Tan Tan was also carefully treating the wounds on Xie Danfeng's body. It seemed to have calmed down. Suddenly, the awakened ones are really powerful. A sinister voice laughed and said, "They didn't disappoint me. Very good. This is an excellent thing." A black-clothed and masked man floated over along with this voice. He stood in front of everyone. His eyes looked at Tan Tan as if he was looking at a heaven-shaking treasure behind the mask. Xie Zhiqiu's eyebrows twitched. A feeling of powerlessness emerged in his heart. The opposite party attacked. They didn't move during the fierce battle a moment ago. I thought that they wouldn't participate. But they have finally attacked. Who are you? Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang turned over and jumped up. Their swords and sabers were unsheathed at the same time. Both of them felt the strength of these people. Nearly 300 black-clothed and masked men quickly appeared. They formed a large circle and trapped everyone inside. Don't worry. The leader of the black-clothed and masked men smiled and said, "You too won't die." Gu Duxing coldly snorted and asked, "Why?" "We are from the upper three heavens." The leader of the black-clothed and masked men played it down. But he still looked extremely proud as he insipidly said, "The people of the Zhuge clan. I am Zhuge Changfeng. Upper three heavens. Zhuge clan." These few words smashed into the hearts of everyone of the Xie clan like muffled thunder. "May I ask, Mr. Zhuge, why has your noble clan come this time?" Xie Zhiqiu stood up with difficulty. He then clasped his fists and said, he was extremely resentful in his heart. He wished that he could skin these black-clothed and masked men alive. He knew that the main culprits behind the destruction of the Xie clan weren't those people of the Ao clan. Rather, it was these people in front of him. However, he didn't dare to reveal it. After all, he and his people would be finished if he revealed it. "We have come to ask for something." That black-clothed and masked man Zhuge Changfeng slightly smiled and said, "We came here with the intention of bringing one person back. But it seems that we will have to bring 2 more people." He no longer paid attention to Xie Zhiqiu after he was done speaking. He merely said in a soft voice, "Don't move. Whoever moves will die." Then he slowly took 2 steps forward. He looked at Tan Tan, who was holding Xie Danfeng, and insipidly said, "Awakened ones can't awaken twice in a day. You come with us." "Go with you?" Tan Tan blankly looked at him. He then asked in bewilderment, "Why should I go with you? These people will die if you don't go with us." Zhuge Changfeng insipidly said, "Including this woman in your arms." Tan Tan's eyes sharpened. He angrily said, "Say that again?" His eyes once again changed into the color of a black hole while he was speaking. A faint black aura began to emit from his body again. Zhuge Changfeng was startled. He suddenly recalled the might of Tan Tan after his awakening. So, he promptly made a decision and shouted, "Attack!" Tan Tan was furious. But he felt powerless. That was because he had discovered that he couldn't mobilize that kind of power even though he urgently needed it. He couldn't stimulate that kind of terrifying power in his heart. He couldn't help but feel grief and indignation. Zhuge Changfeng had already taken the initiative to attack after he had spoken those words. A black light flashed, and a black feather arrow was shot from his hand. The black feather arrow turned into a column of smoke as soon as it left his hand. Then, it shot into Tan Tan's body at lightning speed. Zhuge Changfeng raised his hands again and again as if he had cramps. Then, he shot out the soul-capturing powder, spirit-severing powder, soul-breaking flute, and spirit-lifting net in succession. The other 3 black-clothed masked men also moved at the same time. The same things pierced into Tan Tan's body. They carried a jet black and evil aura. Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang were alarmed. They hastily moved to stop them. But they couldn't stop them. Those things turned into smoke-like powder as soon as they left their hands. It seemed as if they had spirituality. They had clearly been intercepted in midair. But they still automatically took a turn and avoided the interception. Then, they shot into Tan Tan's body. There were 20 such powders in total. And none of them escaped into Tan Tan's body. 20 traces of these highly toxic poisons appeared in the air. In fact, even the air was corroded by 20 clear scratches. These scratches didn't disappear for a long time. Zhuge Changfeng heaved a sigh of relief. He faintly smiled and said, "Awakened one, you can't fight us with your current strength. Let us capture you without putting up a fight." 20 wisps of black smoke shot into Tan Tan's body. However, Tan Tan's body didn't have the slightest abnormality. But his body fiercely trembled. His eyes suddenly opened, and a faint divine light flashed in them. He looked strangely at Zhuge Changfeng. Then a rumbling sound echoed. Suddenly, a big golden net appeared around Tan Tan's body. And it enveloped Tan Tan's entire body. Then, countless wisps of dazzling golden gas suddenly emerged from his body and rushed to the top of his head. And the top of his head, it formed a glorious crown. It seemed as if an emperor had been crowned all of a sudden. 3 things. Everyone could see the first thing. And many people were worried about it. Indeed, Tan Tan's plot has been woven into a big hole by me. It would have been enough to entangle me to death if I hadn't written it well. The second thing is that the annual meeting is about to begin. I haven't even prepared a draft yet. The world is so sad. Chapter 658. Zhuge Changfeng felt relieved. According to the confession of that important person of our clan, this awakened being won't have any power to resist as long as this golden net appears. As for that crown, there's no explanation. But that person also said that some strange phenomena will appear because of the various poisons and the world's power when these 5 killing tools are used. And these strange phenomena can't be controlled or predicted. It is said that a flower may bloom, or the shape of a saber may appear, or even a pile of excrement may appear. So, it's not strange for any situation to appear. This crown is probably one of those unexpected situations, right? But it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the overall situation. Sure enough, the black energy on Tan Tan's body seemed to have met its nemesis as soon as the golden crown and the big net appeared. So, it shrank back into his body. Moreover, Tan Tan had already opened his eyes. But he slowly closed them again. Then he sat cross-legged on the ground. It seemed as if he had lost the mark of his life. He remained silent. Haha, it's really effective. Zhuge Changfeng happily laughed. He had just seen the earth-shattering power of the awakened being. So, he naturally understood that if he were to bring this awakened being back, my contribution to the clan will inevitably soar. In fact, I might even become an elder. Gu Duxing and the others became anxious. They hastily rushed to Tan Tan's side. But they screamed as soon as they approached the golden net. And they hastily drew back. The lapel of their clothes that had come in contact with the golden net had been corroded. This poison is so fierce. No one is allowed to come close. The biggest threat has been eliminated. And the remaining people are also in our grasp. We only need to wait for this strange phenomenon to disappear. Then we can capture this awakened being and bring him back. Zhuge Changfeng was very astute. But he couldn't help but feel somewhat proud of himself at this moment. He said, "Don't waste your energy. These two young sword emperors and saber emperors. This old man has something to say. Would you like to hear it?" A sharp light flashed in Gu Duxing's eyes as he said, "It's better not to say it if it doesn't sound good." Zhuge Changfeng chuckled, "This temper is as sharp as a sword." He paused and said, "Both of you are outstanding talents. My Zhuge clan has always been thirsty for talents. And we need such heaven-gifted talents like you. So, this old man can recommend you if you wish to join us. What do you think?" There were many young martial emperors in the upper three heavens. However, Zhuge Changfeng was well aware that becoming an emperor-level expert in the upper three heavens was completely different from becoming an emperor-level expert in the upper three heavens. 3 days, the value of this was too high. This was because the cultivation conditions of upper three heavens were far inferior to upper three heavens. However, the background of these youngsters' clans was far inferior to the clans of those young experts of the upper three heavens. They could have piled up a young emperor-level expert even if they had used heavenly treasures and heavenly medicines. However, the two men in front of him were brimming with murderous intent, and it was clear that they had not been trained quickly. Such a person was a true genius. Dong Wuxiang sneered, "What nonsense!" Gu Duxing shook his head. "It's indeed nonsense." Zhuge Changfeng replied, "Oh? Do the two of you mean to refuse?" Dong Wuxiang laughed heartily. "You can be considered a smart person, as expected of someone from the Zhuge clan." Zhuge Changfeng's complexion turned unsightly. He pondered for a while and said, "Do the two of you know the consequences of refusing our good intentions?" He was somewhat stunned. The Zhuge clan of the upper three heavens was famous. Even in the upper three heavens, a person would have had to consider carefully if they had extended an olive branch like this. Could it be that these two people refused without even thinking? What consequences? Your families, your friends, including the people behind you? Ha ha. Zhuge Changfeng's gaze was like a knife. He chuckled and said, "They'll all turn into corpses at my command." "Are you threatening us?" Dong Wuxiang frowned. Gu Duxing's eyes focused. "If the two of you insist on thinking like this, then it's a threat." Zhuge Changfeng put his hands behind his back and said indifferently, "But can you withstand such a threat?" Dong Wuxiang and Gu Duxing smiled at each other. Then, Dong Wuxiang said loudly, "You've misjudged us. We brothers have never accepted any threats. We'd rather live standing than kneeling for a lifetime." He pointed his big saber forward and laughed boldly, "Zhuge clan of the upper three heavens? Ha, is it that great? How come I don't think so?" Gu Duxing also laughed. "Miao Bu Tong, GMO, And Luo Kadi laughed in unison. GMO laughed and said, "We also don't think so." Zhuge clan? Why does it sound so much like the Brother Pig clan? Is this big clan full of perverts? Luo Kadi heard Jimo's words. He held his belly and laughed. He said, "Brother Pig clan? Yeah. You can change your name to Rogue clan." Zhuge Changfeng's eyes were full of murderous aura. His whole body emitted an ice-cold chill. His body trembled with anger. His pupils contracted as he said heavily, "Good. Good. Good." He suddenly waved his hand and shouted in a stern voice, "Let's attack together and kill them. Since I can't use them, I'll kill them as soon as possible, so as to avoid future troubles." The black-clothed people shouted and attacked at the same time. Meanwhile, Chu Yang anxiously asked from the land of shadows, "Are you going to attack or not?" Sword Spirit said, "I won't attack if it involves the annihilation of the Sword Master's soul." Chu Yang slowly nodded. He said somewhat sorrowfully, "Good. I'm begging you. My cultivation isn't good enough. I can't protect my brothers from being bullied. Now, I have to look on helplessly as my brothers die in front of me. Sword Spirit, you're ruthless." Sword Spirit heard the determination in Chu Yang's voice. Budi asked in shock, "What do you want to do? You have your duty. But, you've forgotten that I don't." Chu Yang coldly said in a low voice, "The so-called duty of the Sword Calamity is nothing in my eyes. I'm very sullen. I don't want to serve you anymore." "Don't be impulsive. They may not die," Sword Spirit said anxiously. The battle had already begun. Gu Duxing and the others had fallen into an extremely dangerous situation. They had only come into contact with each other, but they had already suffered injuries of varying degrees. Chu Yang looked at them with anger. He turned his wrist, and a short sword appeared in his hand. Then he stabbed it towards his chest without hesitation. He shouted in a low voice, "Then you and your duty will die with me. Wait for 10,000 years before you appear again." "Wait." Sword Spirit was scared out of his wits. He hurriedly stopped Chu Yang. He didn't expect Chu Yang to be so resolute. With a poof, the short sword pierced into his muscles and deeply into his chest. It was only a hair's distance away from piercing his heart. Chu Yang asked with cold eyes, Are you going to do it?" Fresh blood suddenly spurted out. His hand gripped the hilt of the short sword tightly and steadily. "Anyway, I've died long ago. I've earned these few years for nothing. Even if you die again, it won't matter. As the Sword Master of the Sword Calamity, I actually have to be restrained by you, Sword Spirit. I can't do anything I want. I can't stand this." Chu Yang said hatefully, "I won't ask you to do it. Let's just do it like this. To hell with everything." He exerted force in his hand and was about to stab his heart. Sword Spirit was really anxious this time. He hurriedly used his spiritual power to lock the short sword. He said repeatedly, "I'll do it, okay? I'll do it." When he said this, he felt really wronged. Sword Spirit almost shed tears of grievance. "When did I restrain you? Haven't you always been the one to do whatever you want? You're the only one who keeps adding one rule after another. When have I ever restrained you? Why do I have to do this? I'm clearly doing this for your own good. You don't know what's good for you. How can there be such a stubborn sword master in the past? Do you know that if I take over today, you'll die in the future? Oh no, you don't care. If you care, you won't be so decisive now. You'll stab your own heart directly. You're using such an extreme method to force me." Looking at the wound on Chu Yang's chest, if Sword Spirit had a body, he would probably be so scared that he would break out in cold sweat. "You're really something. You actually want to drag me down with you for another 10,000 years. To have met a sword master like you, old Wu is really unlucky." Sword Spirit was aggrieved and wronged, but he still made preparations. At the same time, he was very worried. If he took over Chu Yang's body and Chu Yang's divine soul was injured, then the possibility of Chu Yang surviving the fourth fragment of the Tribulation Sword would be infinitely close to zero. Sword Spirit sighed. He was so depressed that he almost vomited blood. How did this happen? Sword Spirit was aggrieved, but Chu Yang was even more aggrieved. "Motherfucker. Isn't it because old Wu is not strong enough? If old Wu had already broken through to the monarch level, would I still need you? Motherfucker, you actually picked a fight, for my own good? My brother is about to die. Can't you see? At this time, do I need you for my own good? The key to everything is still strength. Only strength. Strength. Chu Yang's heart. Such a realization was deeply carved into his heart with the tip of a knife. Sword spirit is very strong, but he's not me. Tribulation sword is very strong, but it's not my strength. Instead of relying on heaven, earth, or ancestors, it's better to rely on myself. I can't rely on anyone in the future. I can't rely on sword spirit. I can't rely on tribulation sword. I can only rely on myself. I must rely on myself. Gu Duxing and the others were already in imminent danger. The strength of these people from the Zhuge clan was much stronger than that of the Ao clan just now. The huge gap in strength made them unable to fight back at all. If they were facing those people just now, they could still fight with their lives and drag them down with them. But when facing these people, there was no such possibility. Gu Duxing let out a muffled groan. His body was hit by two palms. Dong Wushang desperately went forward to protect him, but he was also hit by two swords because of this. The two looked at each other, and despair rose in their hearts. They only had one thought: Chu Yang, who is hiding in the dark at such a critical moment. You must endure it. You must not come out. If you don't come out, we brothers can still live and continue our journey. If you come out, then we will all be wiped out. Everything will be over. Chapter 659. Zhuge Changfeng fiercely looked at Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang in front of him. He was very happy in his heart. These two people were the ones he wanted to recruit the most. But now, he wanted to kill these two people the most. Once such people grew up, he was well aware of what kind of achievements they would achieve. If they could break through to the saint level, it would not be impossible to turn the Zhuge clan upside down. Such pure sword saints and saber saints had not appeared in the double heavens world for thousands of years. Who knew what kind of destruction a sword saint and a saber saint could cause? Only one thing was certain. The level of a pure sword and saber talent was much higher than that of an ordinary martial artist. For an ordinary martial saint, a 4th-grade martial saint could deal with 100 1st-grade martial saints. However, if a 1st-grade sword saint could kill an ordinary 4th-grade martial saint, Zhuge Changfeng wouldn't be any different. The higher the level of a martial artist, the more obvious the difference between pure and impure. And these two people in front of him clearly had such potential. Moreover, if they were allowed to grow, their lowest achievement would be saint level in the future. This was a terrible thing. Fortunately, they were going to die soon. Fortunately, they were going to die soon. Zhuge Changfeng stood with his hands behind his back. On one hand, he was monitoring the golden light of the awakened ones. He was ready to capture them as soon as the light disappeared. On the other hand, he was looking at Gu Duxing and the others. Then he realized that the other youngsters were also heaven-gifted geniuses besides Gu Duxing and Dong Wushang, the two sword emperors and saber emperors. They were only one step away from breaking through to the emperor level. So, the geniuses of the upper 3 heavens were gathered here today? Zhuge Changfeng muttered in his heart, such geniuses are gathered here. Even in the big clans of the upper 3 heavens, you can't find them. His guess was not wrong. The most outstanding geniuses of the upper 3 heavens were gathered here. Gu Duxing, Dong Wushang, Xie Dan Yuan, Ao Xie Yun, Miao Butong, GMO, and Luo Kudi. Zhuge Changfeng's eyes shot out a crazy color as he saw that victory was in his grasp. He even tightly clenched his fists. If he was not responsible for monitoring the awakened ones, he would have taken action himself. Of course, he also had doubts in his heart at the same time. Why did the clan send me for such an important matter? Logically speaking, such a great merit should not belong to me, no matter what. Logically speaking, it should be the few main targets of the clan who should be groomed to come down, or, for example, an elder. Now, I'm the one who's benefiting. They definitely didn't expect things to go so smoothly this time, right? Zhuge Changfeng smiled. No matter what, I'm definitely going to get the credit this time. Right at this moment, a boundless desolation and bleakness suddenly swept across the land. This kind of desolation that seemed to come from ancient times blew through the forest in an instant, as if it was embedded in everyone's heart. It was filled with endless killing intent and fury. There was also a kind of stifling grievance. This feeling was very strange. Both sides of the battle involuntarily stopped and turned their heads to look. Then, a voice could be heard suppressing its anger as it said, as expected of a clan from the upper three heavens. Coming to the upper three heavens, you are indeed insufferably arrogant. The sarcasm in these words made the faces of the people of the Zhuge clan turn red. One of the great ruling clans of the upper three heavens had come to the upper three heavens to show off their might. This wasn't a glorious thing. Zhuge Changfeng's heart shivered as he turned his head to look. He saw a black-clothed and masked man floating out of the gloomy thicket from the left side of the forest. His body was floating in the air 30 feet high. It seemed as if he was a weightless tree. He was slowly approaching this side. With every step he took, the gloomy smell became heavier. Your Excellency, who are you? Zhuge Changfeng instinctively realized that something was wrong. This black-clothed man is very powerful. He is so powerful that I feel palpitations in my heart as soon as I see him. Puma. Sword Spirit snorted and insipidly said, I am your ancestor. Sword Spirit had unexpectedly used a rare foul language. Sword Spirit wasn't polite at all. He was very stifling at this moment. So, he poured out all the grievances he had received from Chu Yang onto Zhuge Changfeng. How would this have happened if it weren't for you shit-stirrers? Motherfucker, you've made Old Wu miserable. Old Wu would have disappeared for 10,000 years if Chu Yang hadn't passed that hurdle. 10,000 years? How can you ants know what it's like to be lonely for 10,000 years? Even a god would go crazy. However, his words weren't completely wrong. To some extent, Sword Spirit was also the ancestor of the Zhuge clan. Moreover, he was the ancestor of the Zhuge clan. How could such a mysterious expert come out of his mouth and curse so ungracefully? Zhuge Changfeng was even more confused than angry. Who are you, madman? Do you know who you're facing? I'm such an idiot, Sword Spirit muttered. I'm talking nonsense in front of a group of dead people. Zhuge Changfeng was furious. I don't know where this expert came from, but he's so arrogant. He suddenly realized something and asked, You're a member of the Lan clan? Sword Spirit didn't utter a word. A sword appeared in his hand with a clang. Then he pounced down like a demon god. Zhuge Changfeng blocked 2 sword strikes with a clang. Then he rolled backwards. The sword in his hand had turned into 4 pieces in a split second. There was a bloody wound on his chest, and his flesh was dripping. He spat out 3 mouthfuls of blood while rolling on the ground. He cried out in fear, a saint-level expert? Moreover, a high-level one. How could Sword Spirit have time to pay attention to him? He controlled Chu Yang's body, and rushed into the crowd like a gust of wind. Sir Sword Spirit is very angry. I'm so aggrieved. I'm so angry. You're so aggressive that you've angered Lord Sword Gue, and made me possess your body without hesitation. The chances of Lord Sword Master surviving at such a critical moment are very small. Perhaps, I won't come out to meet people for 10,000 years after I make my move this time. I'm so angry. I'm so angry. With such a mentality, the Sword Spirit went mad. He attacked with his highest strength. The sword light flashed in the sky like a long dragon. And 30 Emperor-level experts were neatly cut from their waists as if they were straw being cut. 30 upper bodies flew up in the sky at the same time. Countless big trees fell down in the surroundings. What harm is there in slaughtering the entire world? This move of Sword Spirit's had reached the acme of perfection. Sword Spirit laughed wildly. He took big strides in the sky like a meteor. It seemed as if he was running on flat ground. Then, his sword turned into 10,000 cold lights. 1 cold light pierces 10,000 fathoms. More than 40 experts stopped their forward momentum at the same time. And a transparent bloody hole appeared on their foreheads one after another. They fell down powerlessly. Sword Spirit landed on the ground. Then he bounced up, and a sword light suddenly spread out from the ground to the sky. A sharp will buried deep will not change. Nearly 10 experts screamed. Their heads flew up in the sky at the same time. Their blood splashed out like a waterfall. And more than 30 blood fountains appeared in this forest in an orderly manner. Sword Spirit coldly snorted. Then his long sword suddenly trembled in the air. It trembled thousands of times in succession. Then, the wind and clouds in the sky began to fluctuate. It seemed as if a huge vortex had formed here. And the wind and clouds all over the sky began to converge here. The next moment, the sword light suddenly flashed. And a huge crown appeared in the sky. A gathering of wind and clouds is the emperor. Then, this crown shone like the sun. Countless sword heads separated from the crown. They turned into white lights and penetrated the chests of the black-clothed masked men one after another. Blood didn't even have time to splatter out. But Sword Spirit was already like a divine dragon. He fiercely rushed from east to west. And the sword light left miserable screams wherever it went. Then he went from south to north. And he went back and forth. He moved unhindered from east to west. From far to near, all the black-clothed men fell to the ground in despair. There were only 2 people left standing. Zhuge Changfeng and his second brother. The Sword Spirit had only used 5 moves of the Calamity Sword. And he had slaughtered more than 300 experts of the Zhuge family. The Sword Spirit had gone crazy this time. And this was the first time in 10,000 years since he had obtained the Calamity Sword. And the power that he had displayed was also unprecedented. At the very least, the power that he had displayed at the Sword Master's level of cultivation had never been seen before. Suddenly, the black-clothed silhouette rushed over again. And he had checked every single one of them. In fact, he had even slashed those who were still breathing. And he had beheaded them with one slash. This kind of ruthlessness left everyone dumbfounded. Gu Duxing and the others had just fallen into an absolute crisis. And their savior had suddenly appeared. They had just taken a breath of relief when they saw that all the enemies had disappeared at the same time. This had made everyone choke on their breaths. And they had almost choked on their breaths. My goodness! How can it be so exaggerated? Everyone looked at each other in dismay. They felt as if they were dreaming. If today's matter were to be revealed, no one would believe them even if they insisted that it wasn't a dream. Gu Duxing and the others had appeared when they had just fallen into an absolute crisis. And Ao clan had suffered heavy losses. Ao clan had gone all out. And the Demon King had woken up when they had encountered another crisis. And he had used his supreme power to kill everyone in Ao clan. And Zhuge family had appeared. Everyone had once again faced a huge crisis. Life and death had been imminent. However, a peerless expert who wasn't inferior to the Demon King had appeared at this time. And he had killed all the people of Zhuge family. They had encountered so many crises in such a short time. And the strength of the enemy had been hundreds or dozens of times greater than their own each time. But they had remained safe and sound. This was a treatment that only the protagonists of legends could have. The shadow flashed, and the Sword Spirit had returned. He appeared in front of Zhuge Changfeng and looked at him coldly. Did you say that I didn't know who I was facing? Zhuge Changfeng had said these words a moment ago. He had been very confident when he had said these words. He had been very proud of himself. But the Sword Spirit had attacked after he had said these words. And more than 300 people had died in the blink of an eye. In fact, none of them had had time to escape. The Sword Spirit had replied these words at this time. And he had looked at the corpses all around him. However, these words had become a big joke. You are amazing? How amazing! I will kill all of you. Let's see how amazing you can be. Chapter 660. Zhuge Changfeng's body swayed. His face had turned ashen. He had only received 2 swords from the enemy and had vomited blood repeatedly. His body had become extremely weak. Looking at the corpses on the ground, his heart had already died. He had never thought that his luck would be so bad when he came to carry out this mission. He had finally forced the Awakened One out. But he hadn't expected the Awakened One to be so powerful. The Awakened One had finally recovered. But such an abnormal person had appeared. He had killed more than 300 experts with only 4 or 5 swords. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to escape death. Who are you? Zhuge Changfeng didn't have any thoughts of resistance. What a joke. The enemy was obviously a high-level saint-level expert. He was only a second-grade monarch-level expert. How could he fight with him? He couldn't run away. He only regretted now. Why did I rush so fiercely when this mission was issued? Why did I snatch it so resolutely? If I had taken a step back, wouldn't it have been someone else's misfortune? At the same time, he also hated. He hated Diwu Qingro, the person who had strongly recommended him. That bastard with a different surname. Would he have come to this unlucky place if he hadn't strongly recommended him? He had thanked him profusely. He had even given him a lot of good things before he left. It turned out to be a big trap. Zhuge Changfeng's teeth itched as he recalled Diwu Qingrou's words when he had recommended him. At that time, Diwu Qingrou had said, "Great Elder, this lowly one thinks that this matter needs to be considered carefully. The strength of the people sent must be high. The strength of the people sent must be low. This lowly one thinks that Zhuge Changfeng is the most suitable candidate." Listen, what kind of words are these? Zhuge Changfeng had been possessed at that time. He had thought that Diwu Qingrou was very strategic. He had even nodded in agreement. The great elder had asked at that time, "Why do you say so?" Diwu Qingrou had said, "This lowly one is also considering this matter. After all, the Awakened One is just a rumor. There hasn't been any rumors of an Awakened One for tens of thousands of years. Whether this matter is true or false remains to be investigated. Moreover, this Awakened One by one is very powerful. Even if we suffer losses, it won't be a big deal. Zhuge Changfeng would be enough to deal with it if his strength was average." After all, that was 3 days ago. Therefore, when that bastard Diwu Qingrou became reasonable and considered the bigger picture, the great elder finally relented, and he finally got this good job. Thinking of this, Zhuge Changfeng couldn't help but want to cry. He remembered that after the clan meeting, Diwu Qingrou had specially come out to explain to him, "I was only saying it as an expedient. Otherwise, Brother Changfeng, I'm afraid it would be very difficult for you to get this opportunity." He said that they would treat each other with utmost sincerity, and even treated him as his brother, treating him to a drink. In the end, he even gave that bastard 20 purple crystals. I must have been blind. I must have eaten lard and lost my mind. It was a pity that he could not go back. Otherwise, the first thing he would do when he returned would be to pull out Diwu Qingrou's tendons and peel off his skin. Then he would hang Diwu Qingrou on the roof of the clan's main gate to dry his salted fish. This was perhaps the last obsession of Zhuge Changfeng's life. Because the sword spirit waited for him to reply for a while, and then directly raised his sword. Shwa! Fresh blood gushed out of his neck. The last 2 monarch-level experts of the Zhuge clan turned into 2 corpses in 2 consecutive sword moves. The sword spirit very sullenly roared, and returned to the tribulation space to sulk. At the same time, he racked his brains to think of a way to restore Chu Yang's spirit power before he recovered the 4th fragment of the tribulation sword in a very short time. But the spirit power was the source of life. How could there be a good way to restore it? The more the sword spirit thought about it, the more his head hurt. The more he thought about it, the more sullen he felt. He couldn't help but open his mouth in the tribulation space, and start to curse endlessly. Chu Yang's body swayed, and he sat on the ground. He only felt a burst of confusion in his head, and an indescribable pain seemed to be born in the depths of his soul. He couldn't help but shake his head, but he felt an even bigger headache. Everything in front of him seemed to have double images. He had no choice but to close his eyes. After a long time, he gradually recovered a little. He stood up shakily, turned around, and weakly asked, Are you all right?" Gu Duxing's eyes widened, and he said in disbelief, "Bao? Boss." Then he staggered a step, swayed like a drunkard, and sat on the ground. His but just happened to sit on a broken blade, but he didn't feel any pain. He just looked at Chu Yang with his mouth open, stupefied. Second Master Gu was completely stunned and confused. Ever since the black-robed man came out, Gu Duxing felt that he looked familiar. He also knew that Chu Yang was beside him, but he didn't dare to think that it was Chu Yang, because the gap between them was really too big. This black-robed man was at least a martial saint. Dong Wuxiang and GMO were also stunned, as if they had seen a ghost. The two of them only felt their eyeballs drop to the ground. How could this be? This person was... Boss? The two of them felt as if they were struck by lightning, and they were completely dumbfounded. This kind of shock was 100 times more shocking than when Tan Tan transformed, or when the black-robed man just appeared and killed everyone. Luo Kadi opened his mouth, and was about to speak, or to scream, but he opened it too wide, and only a crack was heard. His jaw was dislocated, and he immediately screamed in pain. He hissed in his mouth, and tears came out of his eyes in pain. Even at this point, he still couldn't help but be shocked, and he still used his dislocated jaw to vaguely shout, "Baro! Baro, get this thing out! This is impossible, is he? Grandma? Boss? Your boss? Oh my gosh! Oh my mother!" Chu Yang looked at these guys weakly, and said weakly in anger, "Why aren't you helping me up? I can't move at all." He fell down as he said this. Sword Spirit was in charge of his body, and it seemed that Chu Yang didn't use any strength, but in fact he had exhausted a lot of his strength every time. And this time, he had to deal with a martial monarch expert, and Sword Spirit had attacked with all his strength in anger and grievance. Chu Yang's body couldn't bear this kind of power. The damage to his spirit couldn't be compared to the damage to his body, meridians, and spirit. Right now, after Sword Spirit left his body, Chu Yang was almost completely exhausted, and he fainted. He didn't even have the strength to move his fingers. And the throbbing pain in his spirit was even more unbearable. Only then did Gu Duxing come to his senses. He hurried over to help him up, and found a flat place for Chu Yang to lie down. The few brothers surrounded Chu Yang, and all of them still felt like they were dreaming. With a cracking sound, Luo Kadi finally remembered to put his chin back on. However, he still couldn't speak clearly. "Granny? Friend, my heavens, my earth, my mother. It's really you." Chu Yang rolled his eyes in annoyance and said, "If it's not me, could it be you?" Luo Kadi was stunned. "Shut up." Dong Wuxiang turned around and shouted at Luo Kadi. Then, he turned to look at Chu Yang, and there was a worried look in his eyes. "Boss, are you okay?" Once this sentence came out, the faces of Ao Shiyun and Xie Danqiong, who were standing at the side, also became serious. "Okay?" Looking at Chu Yang now, how could he be okay? He had already lost his life. Everyone was aware of Chu Yang's strength. Now, he had suddenly erupted with such a formidable power. So, he must have used some kind of secret technique. And this kind of secret technique was usually used at the cost of harming one's own life force. It was either overdrafting one's life force or damaging one's spiritual power. Because only these two kinds of life force sources could activate a secret technique. Moreover, the greater the power of such secret techniques, the greater the depletion. Now that Chu Yang had actually unleashed such great power, it was easy to imagine what kind of damage he had suffered and what kind of huge price he had paid. Thinking of this, the eyes of Gu Duxing, Dong Wuxiang, and the rest all became wet. At the side, Xie Danqiong and Ao Shiyun also had tears in their eyes. Everyone knew that Chu Yang was hiding in the forest. But Chu Yang didn't have to come out at all. No one could force him out. As long as he kept his composure, he would be able to leave unharmed. Moreover, none of the brothers would blame him. Because at that time, he would die if he came out. How could they blame him? They were even praying to heaven and earth that Chu Yang wouldn't be impulsive. But Chu Yang was still impulsive. GMO and Luo Kadi finally came to their senses. They looked at the weak Chu Yang, and their noses turned sour. Then, they suddenly turned their backs and squatted on the ground. After a long time, GMO suppressed his sobs and said, "Boo. I'm not dead, boo-hoo." Everyone's noses turned sour, and they almost shed tears. GMO had rushed over from 1,000 miles away to help. He had come alone to face a strong enemy, and had come to live and die with his brothers. How could he be afraid of death? How could he cry tears of joy because he wasn't dead? Why he was crying and who he was crying for, these were things that everyone understood. He was completely unable to control the excitement in his heart. So, he had used such a lame excuse as "I'm not dead" to cover up his true emotions. Chu Yang groaned and said weakly, "You guys get out of the way. Let me take a look at Tan Tan." At this time, the yellow halo around Tan Tan's body hadn't disappeared. It was still shining. Xie Danfeng propped up her weak body and stubbornly guarded beside him. She didn't even blink. Chu Yang looked at Tan Tan's complexion and gradually felt a little relieved. He slightly closed his eyes and took a look at the injuries he had received. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart as he took a look. His strength might recover soon, and the pain in his divine soul would also subside soon. But the damaged part of his divine soul had truly disappeared. Nearly a quarter of that boundless nebula-like thing in his sea of consciousness had disappeared. It wouldn't be a problem if he were to fight for a short period of time. But it would be impossible to recover the fourth fragment of the Tribulation Sword. It would be inevitable that his divine soul would be destroyed as the Sword Spirit had said. But how could he control the birth of the fourth fragment of the Tribulation Sword? You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.